Work session back to order. It's 1:45. We're going to continue on the conversation. And after the morning meeting, I asked Ms. Bailey Brown to, I think there was some confusion, maybe there wasn't, but I just wanted to make sure, between fund balance and reserve. There's two different things here. And so we were running through that a little bit because it was getting tight, and I want to slow it down, take a deep breath, and now, Lori, you're on. So let's explain the difference, and let's make sure that everybody's on the same page.
Thank you. So there's a fund balance policy and there's a reserve policy. And if you think back to the equation we showed, fund balance is what we bring into the revenue side of the budget, and reserves is what we hold and keep tight. And they are interchangeable, straightforward thinking, but they're two different policies. Reserve is what we're going to hold. All right, so let me back up to the reserve policy recommendations. Currently, I showed you the two policies we have, which are consistent with Florida statute. I'm suggesting that the reserve for contingency, I would recommend language to indicate a target of 5% for contingency. Contingencies are the monies when the BARs come through each meeting and you're transferring from general fund reserves. That's what a contingency fund is for. We pulled from reserves about $5 million last year. About $2 million of that was in response to COVID, anticipated to be put back with CRF funds. But I'm just saying, you got to have the funds that you're going to approach when unanticipated things come up that you want to do during the budget year. I'm suggesting that contingency, we know by statute, can't be more than 10%. So keeping that the same, but target closer to 5% to cover what we're experiencing. The other reserve policy is a cash carry forward policy.
Now, where's all this? Is it
Those are on the two, it was page.
Let's do it by page so that we're all looking at the same thing at the same time.
21. In your handout of the policy, the financial policy. Actually, it's not under the reserve section, it's under the budget section. On page 17.
Page 17 of which?
Of the handouts.
I've got two handouts, so which handout?
It's the big one.
I just want to make sure that everybody is on the same page. Okay, so it's the handout, the supplemental information. The other handout is the budget review, so let's call them what they are when we're talking about it. So we're talking about the budget work session 2 supplemental information, page 17, correct?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
So we included in the handout the policy, the current policy, and I reckoned back, or I hearkened to this when I had the slide up about Florida statutes, showing that our reserve policy, which is shown there on the top of page 17, we've got a reserve for contingencies and a reserve for cash carry forward that are spelled out exactly like the Florida statute. I'm suggesting that we would amend that reserve for contingencies to indicate a target of 5%, because we don't need 10% of reserves. We can certainly go up to that by statute. I'm just recommending for the policy that we make it more in line with what we do. 5% would more than cover us.
So on page 17, we're talking about number 4, contingencies.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Keep going.
Keep going.
The next reserve policy that you see there is reserve for cash carry forward. Again, it reads straight from the statute. I'm suggesting that we wouldn't need what's called reserve for cash carry forward. That's kind of an antiquated term. And operations, we carry forward in the general fund, there was $6 million. We have cash flow. I'm suggesting that we talk about a reserve there for emergency, which is going to be everything else. That's going to be for emergencies, economic downturns, disasters. And I'm recommending that be in a range of 10 to 15% of revenue.
Pick a number.
So number 5.
A range.
So number 4 is 5% instead of 10%.
It's going to be a target of 5. We're going to have the capacity within that policy to go up to 10.
And then number 5, reserve for cash, you want between
10 to 15.
10 to 15.
Can I ask for clarification?
Absolutely.
So currently, contingencies are set at a not-to-exceed amount, and you're saying you want to set a target percentage.
Yes, I've seen this done in other counties, and I think it's realistic. We're not going to, honestly, what would happen is if our fund balance reserve policy, if we're going to stay up above 30%, we're going to need to put 10% there for contingencies or create a new reserve ultimately. I'm suggesting in this reserve for emergencies at 10 to 15%, that, let's see, 10% is 24 million. That would be a bare minimum in an emergency reserve. I think that's a good number. Right now, on current revenues, current year revenues, it's a percentage, so it's going to increase as the budget increases. But right now, I think 24 million is a safe number to hold aside for emergencies. Honestly, we could hold 40 million, but I'm trying to create policies that identify what we're setting aside for emergency. So 10 to 15 would give us 24 to 36 million there. Those are the monies we hold back. County manager mentioned that when we are working now, and Tim presented to you forecasts where we are going to, budgetarily, we're going to either need to use fund balance to balance the budget, reserves, I'm sorry, let me call them reserves right now because we're talking about the reserve policy. To some degree, I told you in the current year, we budgeted for 4 million. We'll know when this year plays out if we actually need to use that 4 million or not. Last year we did the same. I think we budgeted 2 million and didn't need to use it. But again, we're faced with a budget that's out of structural balance, and we will need to go to reserves to some number. And we'll present that when we ultimately present the budget. So, but for right now, I'm suggesting whatever's there for structural imbalance would be maintained in that emergency reserve up to that 10 to 15%. Once we get to structural balance, that will strictly be emergency reserves.
And Lori, all of the different categories you're talking about now, fund balance and contingency and cash carry forward, right now they're all lumped into that one line that says reserve, correct?
Correct. Right now,
So just so you know what we're talking, so this line that we have on here where it shows how much we have left in reserve, it's all of those things right now lumped together.
that's right.
And you account for them, you have some accounting stuff, but when we present that to you, I just want everybody to make sure everybody understands that we're talking about that one line that says reserves. We haven't distinguished when we do the forecasting
Exactly.
what's coming from what.
And I'm suggesting in our policy that we kind of distinguish the contingency reserves, which are where we might go for monies unanticipated during the year that we need, versus an emergency, which we wouldn't touch unless there's an emergency or something that you deem. And then technically in an emergency reserve policy, you should outline the types of things you would go to that emergency reserve for. This is what I'm recommending that I can bring back to you. If you have any points or direction you'd like to give me on an emergency policy, I'd be happy to hear it.
We've got a couple folks.
Commissioner, first Commissioner Delory, then Commissioner Zimbardo.
Actually, he spoke, he raised his hand.
I'm sorry, I was down here
I
trying to
understand
look at
that.
the
He raised
numbers.
his hand first.
Commissioner Zimbardo, please.
I think part and parcel of that policy, the policy should include if that reserve is tapped for the intended purposes, a timeline in which to replenish that reserve.
Absolutely.
And how that's going to occur.
Absolutely. That is a best practice in setting reserve policies. Thank you, Commissioner.
Commissioner Delory.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And
So
then Commissioner Hurd. Did I see your hand up?
Sure.
before we left, you talked about 17%.
Hands.
Okay, where does that play out?
Okay, so the 17% was a minimum policy for fund balance. And remember in the budget
I
equation.
understand that, because we talked about cash forward, we talked about contingencies, so you're talking about a fund balance of 17% on top of that.
Okay, and that was, so fund balance.
I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, I'm just trying to get it all labeled.
Right. So the fund balance policy that we discussed before the break was a policy where when we're looking at the CAFR and the monies we have to bring into the budget, where we want that to be. That's the number that the bond rating agencies are looking at. And that policy is a minimum of 17%. We know that we pleasure it much higher than the 17%. But the policy can stay in perpetuity.
I understand that, but my point is that there's 3 different percentages we're talking about.
Okay, so the fund balance, let's say it's 17%. Let's say, okay, at 17%, the fund balance would come into the budget. That's what we're bringing forward on the revenue side. When we reserve it, we're holding back. I said a target of 5. If you're holding 5 in contingency, you can only hold 12 in emergency reserves. If we were down to 17, in the scenario we're in, where we're closer to 27%.
Can you write this all out?
I think.
Yes, sir.
I think what the commissioner's asking
Fund balance is what you
is,
have at the end of the budget.
Right, what is
The money
this-
that's left over at the end of the year, and we budget for what's left over at the end of the year, which is that number, the reserve number that we show, but we tap into it, so we reconcile.
And
I
the reason
think-
I'm asking is we're confusing phrases and terms.
Yes, sir.
And percentages. I just want to be crystal clear. Can you write it out for us?
I think.
I think a pictorial would be,
Is the easy question, what comprises the 17%?
well, the 17, again, it's the money left over from prior years. But keep in mind, when I'm talking about the 17 minimum policy for fund balance, this is after all of those assigned and committed, the projects that we're carrying forward. This is truly unassigned cash, unassigned cash. So and fund balance isn't necessarily what you're left over with at the end of the budget, it's what you're left over with at the end of your CAFR reporting year that we bring into the beginning of the budget, which, like I said, we're estimating at adoption of the budget.
Lori,
So-
Commissioner Delory, then I said Commissioner Zimbauer, then Commissioner Hurst. So Commissioner Zimbauer has the floor, but if I can just say, we know you know what you're talking about, okay? You're smart, okay? I mean, you're dealing with people, varying degrees of knowledge about what we're doing when it comes to CPA and, and moving funds around. So as Commissioner Delory said, if you want us to say yay or nay, the first thing is to put it on paper and show it to us. Second thing is, very slowly, just explain it to us, or we'll have questions ad infinitum, okay? Commissioner Zimbauer, you have the floor, then Commissioner Hurst.
Just a quick question, maybe it'll help clear up. The contingency policy that you're indicating, 5% target, not to exceed 10%. Then your reserve, which was originally called carry forward, which maybe we're going to call now reserve for emergency identified, which you're indicating a target of 10 to 15%. Is that part of the 17%?
Yes, sir.
That's what I
It's
thought.
where the 17% will end up at the end of the budget cycle.
That understood.
We'll
Thank you.
get
That would be
if
what I
we-
raised my hand to try to
So
clarify.
Commissioner Hurst.
Thank you. As was I. So the piece that I'm having difficulty tracking to is old language to new language. So the 17 is spelled out, but the 10 to 15 is not spelled out, and the 5 is not spelled out that I can see.
Right, I have not drafted those policies as far as,
Okay.
I haven't drafted them yet. I thought I'd recommend them here, have some discussion, and get some direction.
Okay, so from
But
that...
mainly, I wanted to talk about fund balance and reserves and make sure I could get the points across, though.
And we're trying to get the points across.
So from that perspective, to give you feedback, which is what we're asking for, I think, I like the notion of 17 at the minimum. I asked that question, you answered it, you guys confirmed it, so I'm rock solid on that. The work with regard to contingencies and the reserve for cash carry forward, I'm not sure I love the range, because when you put the 17 in there, you're going to have to explain that really clearly so that we're not debating why it's a range. I get why you would want one. We just have to make sure the language aligns so that we don't get confused as to what we're doing in future years and put you through stuff that you don't need to be put through.
Okay.
other comments? And if not, Lori, you
I
can
just have one more comment.
One
if
more
I may.
comment, Bob.
Maybe try to
Commissioner
confuse-
Lori.
Maybe try to confuse the situation just a little bit more.
Okay.
So.
At your own risk.
It's okay, it's all good. So I understand what we're talking about, general budgetary items, I get that. But when we talking project-specific, which we're going to be doing in the immediate future, i.e. next month, when we're talking about capital improvement projects, with the cost of construction that's going up exponentially, I want to make sure that we have realistic numbers to cover what those costs of construction today and potentially tomorrow could be, so that we need to understand what that increase is going to be. I mean, you look at a 2x4 sheet of plywood, it's gone up 3-4 times. So just make sure we're prepared for that at the proper time.
Further comments or questions before I let Ms. Bailey Brown continue? Ms. Lord,
Thank you.
go ahead.
So I'll read my conclusion from the presentation. I've talked to you about reserves and fund balances and the differences. I've recommended a fund balance policy, which is drafted out. I've recommended some ideas for reserve policies. I will spell them out, give you the current situation, how that would play out in those, and then, of course, those numbers change as the budget grows. But I'm suggesting or recommending policies that can hopefully live in perpetuity and not have to be readdressed because they are percentages. But I will say that we need to look at the structural balance of the general fund. That should be our priority in getting levels of service consistent with the revenues that we have coming in.
And that concludes your...
Yes, sir, that
any-
concludes.
Yes, Commissioner Zimbauer.
Thank you again for putting all this together. I think this is very helpful. I think it's, and I clearly understand the 17 million, what you don't see in the background accounting that goes into that our public does not see. And I think it's wise for this body to adopt a policy that specifically addresses what reserves are indicated for, should be utilized for, and the policy to preserve those, which gives the public the transparency to understand what that 17 million or 17% is sitting there, instead of that's just 17% reserve and nobody knows from the outside, the public, what it's really for, other than maybe it's some reserve slush fund that would be utilized for shortfalls here or this or whatever. I think this is the more professional way to do it, so thank you for bringing it forward.
Further comments?
I think we're good, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ms. Bailey Brown, I know this was like going to the dentist and having a tooth pulled,
That's okay.
but
Not for her. She
understand,
loves
you
it.
know, I mean, I'm sorry?
She loves it. That wasn't for that, wasn't tough for
Well,
her.
she loved it, but maybe some of us didn't. But thank you very much. And when we come back and formalize this, I think, you know, obviously we need it on paper. We need to look at the dollars and everything, and we need to have the policy behind it. So I appreciate that very much.
Good job.
Thank you. Yes, good job, everyone. All right, who is going to stay here to help Terry get through this?
There's a real confidence booster.
Actually, Chairman, we have the consultants who put the rate study together here, so.
Thank you
I
very
have a
much.
5-person army with me.
I knew Terry wasn't going to come in alone.
Oh, now he's really bringing it back
That's what I
up.
said. He's bringing the whole team.
reducing.
Well, by the amount of people we have coming, Commissioners, I think we could probably cut the budget in this area.
I think these are all consultants, too.
These are not all consultants.
Some of us used to be.
You know, all I can say is they're all surrounding Terry, taking care of him, taking the bullet for him.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. For the record, Terry McHugh, Director, Environmental Services Department. And with me today are Carrie Gryan, our Senior Financial Division Manager, Eric Rao, our Lead Rate Analyst with Stantec, Oh, is the mic off?
Is it on?
Can you hear me? Is this any better?
No, that's why I asked you to get a little bit closer.
Yeah, pull it towards you as best you
Okay,
can.
Very good.
Thank you.
Next to Eric is Shaquille Balroop, our new Solid Waste Division Manager, who's been here 2.5 months. And behind us is Patrick Luce, also a consultant with Stantec, and our esteemed financial manager, Cecilia Monti, who I've heard this might be her last time with us. She might not be here next year. We'll try and talk her out of it. But. So with that, Tim?
Commissioners, we have 4 budget slides that represent the FY22 environmental services request, and then we'll get on to the rate presentation. So this is a current overview of the Environmental Services Department. It's separated into 2 divisions. We have the Utilities Division on the left, which provides engineering services, water and wastewater. And then we have the Solid Waste Division on the right, which provides landfill services, transfer station, and compliance management. This chart shows the base budget overview for environmental. These are costs that will be incurred every year. They exclude capital projects, fleet, and internal charges. The water sewer funded utilities division is on the top. The 11.4% increase in personnel services includes a 3% salary adjustment, increase to anticipated health insurance costs, and 3 new position requests. The overall base budget increase for utilities is 5.6%. We have the solid waste division on the bottom, which has a total overall increase of 14.4%, and the department's overall increase of 7% is equal to about $4 million. There are 225 FTEs currently in the Environmental Services Department, and their FY22 requests include 5 additional FTEs.
Sure, and with that, I'll add some context. Consistent with Commissioner Sir's comment earlier about vacancies and positions, I mean, we constantly address which positions are vacant and then what new position needs are. So with the 2 solid waste positions, I'm comfortable enough with Shaquille being here for 2.5 months and seeing immediate improvements in operational efficiencies. I'll be retracting both of the FTE requests for solid waste. So the scale house operator, I'll retract entirely, and I'll convert an existing position to cover the hazardous waste technician that we need. That's right. Regarding the water and wastewater positions, the chief, well, we call it a wastewater treatment plant operator, is for the Yankee Lake Surface Water Treatment Facility. Recently, the city of Longwood diverted 500,000 gallons a day of wastewater from our Greenwood Lakes facility to Altamont Springs, which means we'll be operating this surface water plant more. So not only will we have increased operational costs, it's also very challenging to keep that system running, and it would still be operating intermittently. So that's the purpose of that position request. The industrial pretreatment
Excuse me,
inspector.
Terry, and the reason for that again was, what did Longwood do?
They completed a connection with Altamont Springs and sending 500,000 gallons a day of wastewater to Altamont Springs instead of Seminole County.
Okay.
And the good thing for us about that is that it pushes back the need to, we're not really able to expand the Greenwood Lakes wastewater facility, but we'd have to transfer flow that would divert flow from Greenwood Lakes to Yankee Lake North, because that's where we have footprint to be able to expand the wastewater treatment system.
So you're gaining capacity that we could use somewhere else.
That's right.
Okay.
The immediate problem with that, though, is that that also means we have 500,000 gallons less per day of reuse that's available to our customers, hence the need to augment it more from surface water plant from Yankee Lake. The industrial pretreatment inspector position is it's required, a regulatory requirement to have industrial pretreatment, both a coordinator. And currently that position is vacant. Our current wastewater manager has been fulfilling those duties and doing well with her and her team. They've submitted the annual report requirements. But what we've found is that we had a retirement about a year ago. We hired someone for 6 months and left because the work for that position really should be 2 positions. There's a more field-based position, which is what this ask is as an inspector, and then more of a administrative role to be able to take care of the rest of the work that's involved. The last ask is a SCADA technology coordinator. So SCADA is supervisory control and data acquisition. It's essentially the brains behind our remote operations, operating our wastewater plants, our water plants, and remotely monitoring our lift stations. And most utilities have this position, and we've had one until recently. When I started in the director position here 2 years ago, I folded that position to create a maintenance manager, which I thought was a more dire need at that time, to bring that on board now. So this is a request to move that position back. Tim?
This slide shows non-base requests, which include 19 requests to replace rolling stock within environmental services. This is in line with the existing fleet replacement plan. They also are requesting 11 new rolling stock items for $890,000, 4 small facilities requests for $70,000, and 4 technology requests for $118,000. We'll be presenting the overall environmental services capital plan on June 29th. And now we're going to move on to the rate study.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman?
Sure, go right ahead.
Before we move on to the rate study, so, Tim, you spoke about, we're going to be talking about capital improvement projects when?
June 29th.
Okay, I'll hold my questions to then.
And I do want to point out, Terry's in the unenviable position of having to present his budget before we finalize the budget, but he's giving you information because it's related to the rate sufficiency study, and we needed to get that in front of you. So all of the other departments will present their budget to you after we've submitted the proposed budget. So Terry's stuff is a little bit preliminary, and we should have predicated this with that, so you know.
Okay, thank you.
And I'll also add on to that, in that we are wrapping up our water sewer reclaimed water master plan, which will be done this summer. And I'll be scheduling this fall a workshop that shares with you the new CIP. So with that, we're going to transition to the rate analysis. Next slide, please. And what we're after is we'll be recommending options for near-term rate planning, and we'll be highlighting key challenges that we're facing, and we'll review with you the results of different planning scenarios. Next. So I'll stay here for a moment to talk about what happened last year's rate presentation. So this would be new for Commissioner Herr, but we talked about last week. But on the water sewer side, it was recommended in light of the uncertainties with COVID that we would not do a rate increase on the water sewer. But the cost of that was, instead of what is 3% annual increases, now becomes 3.75% annual increases. That was the recommendation that was approved unanimously by the board. On the solid waste side, the Solid Waste Enterprise Fund is cash flow negative. Expenses exceed revenues. Main reasons for that is that recycling is now an expense instead of revenue. And also with the market and interest rates, there's almost no interest income on our reserves. So the consequence of this is that if there were no tipping fee increases, the solid waste revenue fund would have been depleted by 2028. But we can't correct this cash flow balance all at once, because if we do so, that puts our tipping fees way out of line with our neighbors. So we're still a business too, so we can't do it all at once. So the approach instead is to do annual assessments and come back to you each year to see where we sit. And this year's update of this analysis is going to confirm those recommendations. So with that, I'd like to transition to Mr. Eric Grau to go over the details of this.
Thank you, Terry. Eric Grau, I'm principal with Stantec Consulting Services, Inc. If you see me looking behind me, it's because I have Patrick Luce with me. He was the lead consultant for this year's study. So we were tasked this year with updating the financial management plans that we developed last year. And as Terry alluded to, last year we met in a similar circumstances, although be it remote. And based upon the results that we presented to you guys in the discussion that followed, as Terry said, on water and wastewater, the direction given was for a 3% rate adjustment, then to reconvene and reevaluate the following summer. So here we are now. For solid waste, it was the 3% increase for the reasons Terry outlined. So now we're here to update the financial management plans. And we've updated each of them with the latest and greatest information. We've reviewed the assumptions within the model. We've reviewed all assumptions with staff. We updated our beginning fund balances to reflect audited FY '20 ending fund balances, so basically what was in the bank account on the evening of September 30, 2020, and audited, we assume is our beginning fund balance to start our analysis. And then we're looking at a 10-year forecast, so fiscal year 2022 through fiscal year 2031. And after, upon updating each of the financial management plans, then, we would look to identify alternative rate plan scenarios that could fund all of those identified requirements between fiscal year 2022 and fiscal year 2031. Ultimately, what we would hope to get is an understanding of the financial implications of each of the different sensitivities that we test. So each of the different assumptions that we look at, try to get a sense of what the financial implications are to our 10-year forecast. And then ultimately develop sustainable rate plans that will fund all those requirements, but do so in a way that is sustainable over the entire forecast. So starting with water and wastewater. So I'm going to begin with the answer. We're recommending that the county proceed with a one-year rate increase and then reevaluate next year prior to or as part of the budget setting and rate-making practice for next year. The key takeaway from the study is that rate increases are necessary to fund the identified requirements. I guess I'm going to back up one line. So what we're recommending is a one-year increase because, as Terry said, the CIP master plan is still underway, and we expect it to be completed towards the end of this calendar year, but then that would be sufficient timing to then integrate the findings from that study into our financial management plan for next year. So by going with a one-year approach, next year we should have a much more informed financial management plan from the perspective of the future capital needs. And so the key takeaway, as I mentioned, was that the rate increases are necessary in order to fund the requirements. Today's rate revenue is not sufficient to fund the requirements that have been identified. In terms of significance is the annual operating and maintenance expense. On average, between fiscal year 22 and 2031, we're looking at about $45 million per year of annual O&M expense. Of that $45 million, we assume 50% or 6 months of annual O&M expense is kept and reserved within the operating fund for the enterprise. So we won't let our end-of-year operating fund balances fall beneath that 6-month reserve target. You want to keep that 6-month reserve target for liquidity. Should a hurricane pass through and your customers are unable to pay you, you'll have the cash on hand to make your payments before the revenue comes in back from the customer base. And then the other big piece.
What was our policy in the past for the operation maintenance? You're saying 6 months. What was our policy in the past?
We've been rolling with 6 months for.
And that's the answer. You're just keeping it the same.
Yeah.
Okay. But the way it sounded was like we were increasing it.
Oh, no, not an increase. The other big spending component has to do with the capital improvement program. And so I'm going to pause for a moment here and kind of focus on that for a moment. So the average annual CIP spending that's built into the model is about $22.5 million per year. Now, what's important to note about that is that $22.5 million is effectively double what the average annual spending is per the current 5-year CIP budget. The reason being that the current 5-year CIP budget doesn't yet include any assumptions for increases to come from the CIP master plan that's currently being updated. So we made an assumption that annual spending north of $20 million, so $22.5 million, would be on par with kind of the average annual spending that was identified back in 2013 when the original CIP master plan was completed. So we think it's a realistic expectation that once we get the results from the CIP master plan, that average annual spending may increase by as much as double. So that's about 22.5 million. So that's, and so we've baked that into the baseline of all the scenarios we look at for water and wastewater. That average 22.5 million of annual CIP spending is what's baked into all of our scenarios. We have other scenarios we'll talk about where we look at what if there are, developer-driven expansion projects on top of that. But it's all going to be on top of the 22.5. And so that's our kind of our primary planning concern or consideration. And then it's with this increase in capital spending or requirements, do we contemplate use of debt service? When we looked at the study last year, we didn't double the CIP. And we didn't project a need for significant CIP out in the future. But now with this doubling of the CIP and a recognition that our CIP will likely be going up once we get the results of the study, we now have to contemplate use of debt in the future. So we're going to look at different rate plan scenarios, ones that assume no debt and ones that assume debt. And then as I mentioned, we'll look at we also looked at other additional CIP scenarios, specifically developer-driven expansion projects, which we looked at last year also, but we'll look at them in the context of the updated plan. Same with alternative water supply projects. And then we also have advanced metering infrastructure costs coming in the near future. And so we looked at the impact of the financial management plan of alternative AMI scenarios, whether we use a third-party source for the work, or we keep it in-house. So in terms of the rate plans evaluated, our baseline financial management plan, basically it reflects all the updates that we've made to the model and we've discussed with staff, and says what level of annual rate adjustment is needed to fund our requirements each year starting fiscal year 2022. The second scenario we look at, we're calling alternative scenario 1, is that baseline, but with no debt. So under our baseline financial management plan, that assumes that debt that we will need to borrow to fund the capital plan. But if we don't want to borrow, we want to cash fund the capital, that's our alternative scenario 1. And then alternative scenario 2 is really a set of alternative scenarios that say, what if we were to go one more year of no rate adjustment, like we did last year? What would be necessary to recover that quote-unquote lost revenue in either over a multi-year period or in a one-year fix, if you will, to recover that revenue? What would that look like, both assuming debt and not assuming debt? So the next series of slides are going to be pictures or screenshots from our financial model dashboard. I'll pause here on this first one for a moment and explain what we're looking at for those who may be looking at this for the first time. But at the top of the chart, we have what's currently encircled with the dashed lines are the water and wastewater rates assumed for the given scenario that we're looking at. And so for this scenario, we're looking at 3.75% water and wastewater rate revenue adjustments beginning in fiscal year 2022, continuing each year thereafter through 2031. The next two rows beneath that represent our rate covenant results. So by how much our net revenues, by how much do they exceed our annual debt service coverage requirements? And so we have a requirement of 1.10, I believe it is, on just net revenues, or 1.25 if you include capacity expansion charges. The rate covenant is not an issue of concern under any of these scenarios. Currently have strong coverage, and under all scenarios, it gets to about 2.0 times net revenue being 2 times debt service requirements by around fiscal year between 24 and 26. And 2.0 is a strong, good debt service coverage level that we would want to be at from the perspective of the rating agencies, should we need to go to the market at any point in the future for funding of capital. And then moving down, beneath the rate covenant results, we have our typical monthly bill. So this is a typical monthly bill, water and wastewater service for a single-family residential customer in the county, using a typical single-family residential consumption of 8,000 gallons per month. That represents the typical user in the county, within your system. And so we have the current bill, monthly bill is just over $88 per month. By fiscal year 2026, we would, or 5 years from now, we would be at $105.87, and then by the end of the 10-year forecast, we would be at $127.18. Then moving down to the charts beneath, the top left-hand chart, that is our operating fund balances. So each of those blue bars represent our projected end-of-year fund balance. And that black line represents the 6-month reserve target that I spoke of earlier. So we'll never let our blue bars drop below that black line. And if it needs to fund capital, that's when you would then see borrowings pop up in other charts. If I go, staying on the top row, that center chart, revenues versus expenses. This chart shows us with the blue dashed lines, that's the annual projected O&M expenditures. If we add in all the other cash outflows, so for debt, for capital, the aggregate of all that cash out is represented by the orange line up above the dashed blue. And the black line represents all the cash inflows into the system. And so for a sustainable financial management plan, you want your cash inflows and your cash outflows to match. Because if our orange line is above our black line, our operating fund blue bars are going to drop down. They'll build up if it's inverse. We have expenditures by type in that right-hand top chart. Moving down to the bottom row, we have CIP spending in that left-hand chart. That's our $22.5 million per year average starting in '22. Then how that gets funded in the next chart to the right, and then the one all the way to the right in the bottom right-hand corner, that shows the necessary borrowing that would be needed to fund the capital for which we don't have available resources above our target, our 6 month of annual O&M target. And so what this shows us is that our baseline financial management plan works with 3.75% every year. We see that our fund balance is greater than or equal to our target each year in that top left-hand chart. We have a sustainable financial management plan in that top center chart. And we have projected borrowings in that bottom right-hand chart of about $42.5 million starting in fiscal year 2025. Now, if we wanted, all else equal, to fund this same plan, but with no debt, that would require an additional 0.85% increase per year, or a total of 4.6% water and wastewater rate adjustments per year. And that would wipe out, you can see in the bottom right-hand chart, that the borrowing need has totally disappeared. And if you look at that typical monthly bill line at 8,000 gallons, by fiscal year 2026, we would have a bill that's about $110.28 versus our baseline bill at that point of $105.87. And then by 2031, the gap would grow to a monthly bill of $138.13 compared to $127.18. Now, alternative scenario 2A begins our set of scenarios where we evaluate what would be needed if we proceed with one more year of no rate adjustment. Wait until after we get the results of the CIP master plan update. And what this tells us is that if we were to delay one more year, we would need, starting in fiscal year 2023, an additional 0.8% increase per year, or a total of 4.55% per year water and wastewater adjustments. to fund the identified plan. But this would still generate borrowing, much like the baseline plan did. And and looking up at the typical monthly bill in fiscal year '26, we would be looking at $105.34 versus our baseline of about $105.87, so about 50 cents less. But by fiscal year 2031, the bill is actually greater at $131.64 versus our baseline of $127.18. Scenario 2B is just like scenario 2A, but instead of trying to recover that lost revenue over the full forecast, what would it need to be to recover in 1 year, fiscal year '23, and then continue with our steady state 3.75% increases? And for that to work, we would need a 7.75% one-time increase in fiscal year 2023 before we could drop back down to the 3.75s. Essentially, it's the 3.75s times 2, but it's got to be a little greater because you miss out on the benefit of compounding from adopting or implementing rates sooner rather than later. And so that would be a 4% additional increase in 2023. Moving on to alternative scenario 2C, this one tries to fix over a multi-year period, but do so in a way that avoids borrowing. And to avoid that borrowing, we need to raise rates so much so soon that really the problem gets fixed in 3 years, that lost revenue. And so what would be required would be an additional 10% of rate revenue adjustments. We're at 7.25% in '23, 7% in '24, 7% in '25, and then we can drop to our steady state 3.75s. The last scenario says, what if we do it in 1 year? Well, that 1 year fix to avoid borrowing in the future would mean a 13% increase in 2023, or a one-time adder of 9.25% above our 3.75s.
Excuse me just for a second. I know we're going to get to the summary results, and I think all of us are kind of following this because we got it in front of us, and this is really great stuff. Terry, the recommendation you're making is a 3.75, and I understand the scenario, the situation you're in is you need to design a budget based on what we recommend. Is that correct? Is that correct, County Manager?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Does anybody want to not increase this year and go to any other scenario other than 3.75? Okay, good.
I had some questions. But
Yeah.
I'll let him.
Commissioner Hearn.
I have no interest in shortcutting water treatment. I have interest in staying debt-free, and I have no interest in delaying the inevitable, which will make it harder on the consumer to absorb into their family budget. So when I hear all of that, I think what I want is alternative scenario 1, which hits at 4.6%, which keeps us debt-free and steadies the increase over time. Do I have that right?
That's stated correctly, yes.
Commissioner Zimbauer.
Thank you, Commissioner Herr. I concur completely, 100%. I think that makes the best fiscal sense, not only for the corporate side, but also the customer side. To just understand, so we get it on the record, have we looked at it? I don't see anything in here, the cost to borrow. I know it's baked into the numbers
Where I was going.
if you're borrowing, but what is the actual cost overall if you were going to bond? Have we run those numbers?
Do you have that there?
I'm sure there's a lump sum. And let's just take on the scenario that you've proposed, the initial, the baseline, what is the full cost to bond CIP?
All right, let me just make sure I find the right number.
And as he looks for it, for the nerds in the house, I know there's more than one at least. This is a super awesome tool, and I'm looking forward. Stantec is getting close to the point to making a web-based version of this, such that clients can access their model and make changes themselves on the fly. So
tool.
So under the baseline scenario, it's $42.4 million of total borrowing needed over the forecast. The borrowing, well, by 2031, the aggregate of all that debt is about just under $2.5 million per year of debt service expense.
Yeah, I concur with Commissioner
Mr. Chairman?
completely. That would be my direction.
Commissioner Delory.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Terry, with the CAP that you're planning, we haven't gotten that real number yet because you're still working on the overall master plan.
That's correct.
What's in that CIP, big picture-wise? Because you should be looking at improvements to the system, number one. You should also be looking at alternate water supplies, number two. And you should also be looking at what we talked about with the state when it comes to our actual water supply.
Okay. Sure.
Are all those in there?
Alternate water supply is only in the current CIP in a limited fashion. It will be.
Can you repeat that?
There's not much funding for alternate water supply in the current budget, in the current CIP from the last master plan. It
Okay.
will be included in next year's. Yes.
This go-around that we're getting at the end of this year?
We're getting at the end of this year, which I'll be presenting to you. But those costs aren't reflected in this. I do have an alternative scenario that addresses alternate water supply, which we'll get to. It's,
Because I think it's difficult for us to make a decision if we don't know if all those items are included in your budget.
okay. So,
I mean, how do you make a decision if you don't know if all that's in there?
sure. So hearing both what Commissioner Herr and Commissioner Zembauer said about avoiding the need to go out for bonds, and hearing your considerations also, the fact that we're completing a master plan next year gives us some latitude. And we annually reassess this calculation every year.
I understand that, Terry,
Okay.
but it's difficult for us to look at, how to move forward with the CIP if I don't know of an alternate water supply, because when we talked to the state, and now we took the settlement with the St. Johns River people, we've talked about how we're going to be looking at the aquifer and all the different issues when it comes to alternate water supply. That has to be in your rate structure somewhere.
I agree. And what we're working on now is a recharge analysis that can demonstrate positive impacts from recharging the aquifer from treated surface water from Yankee Lake. But right now is, if we had to produce 5 MGD of potable water from Yankee Lake.
Yeah, if you're doing that, then you got to go to an RO plant, correct?
Yes, and
Now you're talking-
round numbers for us is 120 million.
That's not in here yet.
That is not in here.
Commissioner Zimbauer.
I think I know the answer to this question, but I want to ask it just to make sure.
I'll wait till he finishes to continue.
I'm sorry, I thought you were...
No, it's all right.
No, go ahead.
I'll continue.
Commissioner, please. No, go
That's
ahead.
the way we're doing it. Let's continue.
I'm good. You go right ahead. I don't want to hear what you got
Commissioner
to say.
Delory, I thought that you were finished. My fault. Please go ahead.
It's all right. I just wanted to make sure that we're looking forward for years to come, because that's what we're doing. We're doing X amount of year look forward, that we're looking at everything when it comes to alternate water supplies, when it talks to the aquifer, all of that stuff needs to be in there. The full CIP, everything, because for us to sit up here and say that we're not going to be doing certain things, or we're going to be doing certain things, everything, there can't be any surprises as X year comes up. And I just want to make sure that whoever is paying into our water system, that they understand what all those capital improvements need to be, so that we can truly figure out what our expenditures need to be at the most timely purpose, time-wise, to see how much we need to be charging people. Or do we borrow money, even though we don't want to do these improvements? And then also figure out what the cost of future value of that dollar could be, because that's how you need to figure out what that rate base is. That's how we've always discussed it.
Yes, and we'll be going in depth to that this fall when we have the work session.
I understand
with
that.
the completed master
But I
plan.
just
Yes.
want to make sure that we're crystal
Right.
clear.
Right. Crystal clear.
Are you through?
Now I'm through.
Thank you. Commissioner Zimbauer.
Just to verify, and I've raised this question from all the CFWI meetings that I sat on for the past year. This in no way, shape, or form anticipates unknown legislation, unknown additional requirements that may come down from any of the other governing bodies that put these requirements on us. And the fact that we have a drive-by every year, that gives us the opportunity to address any changes legislatively or any structural things that we need to address is...
That's absolutely
That's what I'm
correct.
understanding, the one-year review process?
That's correct. And what I'll also say, too, is historically, 2 fiscal years ago, we had expire 5 years of rate increases of up to 3%. And this presentation instead was, can we justify it or not? And I believe 1 out of those 5 years, it was reduced to 2.75 or 2.5. I'm very reluctant in the future to ask for a long time frame of a not-to-exceed number because of all these uncertainties. So I expect moving forward to come here annually with a full assessment based on the latest and greatest regulatory changes and challenges that we see for the utility.
So every year going forward, if the conversation that's been going on with CFWI, as well as what we just went through, trying to preserve our rights to the water, moving forward in the future, more likely than not, we're going to continue to see these impacts come to bear on our entitlements, which then, of course, will impact our cost overall, et cetera, et cetera.
That is all correct, yes.
That's all I have.
And it assesses impact fees also. So, yeah.
Anyone else before we continue?
One question.
Commissioner Herr?
I just have a point of clarification. The comment was made that we do this by either raising the rate or debt.
Or both.
Well, to be clear, debt still gets paid through the fee structure.
That's correct.
It's not, and debt costs money. So it's not or, it's just when.
Yes. That's a fair point.
Commissioner Glord?
The only reason I'm bringing that up is because in today's market, and it changes constantly, you can't borrow money as cheap as you can today.
Understood.
Also, Terry, when you give us this full analysis of the CIP, can you also be telling us how much in which year you plan on reducing the cup?
Yes.
To make sure that we're actually getting our target number?
That-
So we can see a deficit or however that number works?
I can share that with you, but there's also the big asterisk next to it because the cup can be reduced at any time.
I get that.
Okay.
But I want to make sure that there's no surprises.
Yes, sir.
So that, we're not status quo and all of a sudden, 1 year we have to reduce. I'd like to make sure that we're reducing on a regular basis.
Very good.
Commissioner Lockhart?
Asking for a comparison that may not be fair, right? So private utilities go to the PSC for rate increases. How do we, with this proposal, the one that we seem to be coalescing around, compare to what some private utilities are proposing?
Our largest local private utility recently had rate increases, and I was able to get my hands on their newly approved rate structure today. And where they fit in, and to be fair, it is statewide enterprise, so it's not just the parts that are in Seminole County. So their customer base that justifies the rates for them is
All over.
statewide, is
Right.
all of that company. And plugging in their number based on my back-of-the-napkin calculations for 8,000 gallons a day, their number now is a little over $111, which would be just over Castleberry's at top of market.
So, but do we, in terms of an increase, because that's what we're talking about a little bit here, is this compounding increase projected out, not necessarily the total, because some of theirs, some have water and sewer, some just have water.
Yes. So that would be for a water and sewer customer. So that's our standard of comparison here. And
What page is that on? Is that
49?
Sorry, I have a hard time.
Yeah, I'm with you. I can't
Oh,
see that
okay.
far.
Thank you.
Sure, and that company was not on this benchmarking, but we do
I
have
see
local
that.
utilities, yes.
Yeah, I see that, okay.
But,
I just
yeah,
kind of want to
yeah.
get a feel, because I know there's conversation about that pops up every now and then with that particular entity, and I want to make sure that people in glass houses aren't throwing stones.
And if I can, When you come, yesterday, when we were talking, I asked you, the same question about Utilities, Inc., to make sure that we knew exactly where
We were
they
doing
were.
so well. We never said
We really were.
we were doing great.
I mean, it's the only private utility in Seminole County. I mean, who we keep teasing here? Just wanted to find out what that is. But also in the discussions, we've talked about, year after year, but you have already indicated that you're doing a massive study, which is coming back, an overall study, which is coming back at the end of the year, correct?
Correct.
So in my discussion, I just want to be clear here in the discussions that you and I, we're only talking about, we're not looking, as you just said, over a 3 or 5 year. You're just talking about this year.
Correct.
And correct me if I'm wrong, you asked for this year, until you do that study and you really know where you are, you thought that a 3.75, that was your recommendation. Is that what you're telling me?
That's correct.
Okay, I just want to make sure that we're all talking about the same thing. Okay, thank you very much. Other questions? Comments?
Before I would agree with the 3.75, I want to know what's in the CIP.
Understood?
Well, and we know the 3.75 puts, it's a debt requirement. So just to make sure, the 3.75 recommendation has a debt requirement with it, the 4.6 doesn't.
That's also correct.
True.
But you also-
Okay, I'm not disagreeing, but see, I want to make sure we're dealing with apples, we're not dealing with apples and oranges. He's not asking for, the 4.6 is over a long period of time.
Both are. The 3.75
But-
plays out over a long period
I
of time
agree.
as well.
But I'm just saying, the scenario that has been suggested here, the 4.6 is over a certain period of time, would have no debt. You're absolutely right, the 3.75 would, but that is also not including the study that Terry is, the overall study of the entire system that Terry is doing this year, which he's going to bring back. And that's why I asked yesterday. I said, okay, this 4.6 has no debt, 3.75 does. How come you're doing the 3.75? And the answer was, and change me, correct, well, if you want to say it, please.
My answer is, with the impending master plan baked into this analysis we're sharing with you today, is assuming that we're going to be roughly doubling our CIP, which is a pretty fair assumption, but I don't have the master plan in front of me. When we have the master plan in front of us and look at it next year, maybe the 4.6 becomes 4.7, maybe it becomes 3.8. We'll be able to assess that when the master plan's in front of us. I think the assumption's a good one and it's a fair one, but with us looking at this and committing to coming before you every year to go through this, I'm willing to entertain the 3.75 with the assumption that next year, with the master plan in hand, we'll go through.
Commissioner Zimmer, I'm going to recognize you if Commissioner Herr hasn't finished, but I wanted to finish my thing. So that's why I was saying, if we were looking at a long-term thing based on facts that we have right now, I would not disagree with Commissioner Herr and Commissioner Zimbauer on the 4.6 so that we would have no debt. The point was, I am also taking, right now, I'm looking at the recommendation of our director, who's saying that he wants, and he feels comfortable with 3.75 today, and until we have a master plan that then he can look out over the course of time. That's all I wanted to put on the table right now. Okay, Commissioner Zimbauer.
Sure. So, a couple things, and I think we've already covered this in the presentation for the consultant. If you stay at 3.75 right now, which scenario does that put us into in your presentation?
That would be the financial management baseline.
That's what I thought. Okay, just so we're clear. So, and I don't want to assume anything, but you all are expert in what you do, are you not?
I like to think so.
We're going to go on the record, say they're not. I got that.
You have been looking at the master plan.
Yes.
You have a pretty good feel, notwithstanding some regulatory impact or some bizarre unknown need.
Yes.
Do you feel you've got a pretty good handle what that master plan is likely to look like?
I do, and
is
also,
are these numbers representative of that?
they are.
What I thought.
And I'll also say, when I look at the borrowing panel on the baseline financial management plan, where some borrowing shows up in 2025, if borrowing is small, we do an annual revalidation of CIP projects. So annually, so that the master plan sets the benchmark, and then every year we reassess based on drivers. Is this more important or less important, or is something new I didn't know about? If borrowing is small, I wouldn't borrow in 2025 under this scenario. I wouldn't start looking to borrow until 2027. That's 7 years from now.
Right, so if we were to do a 4.6 at this point.
Yes.
And when you're done with your master plan, and you come back next year, and I think you said, well, it could be 4.7 is what it finally
Yes.
flushes out to be, but it could be 4.5.
It could be.
So if we put it off a year, and it does come in at, let's say, 4.5, then we're going to go from 3.75 to 4.5 versus 4.6, or maybe to 4.7. That's fair analogy?
That's a fair analogy.
Just wanted to make sure. Okay, thank you, that's all I have.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Commissioner.
Terry, have you looked at, in your CIP and your rate analysis, of increasing the amount of rate structures that we have to try to recoup more from the high-end users?
It's not part of this analysis, but it will be part of our holistic water supply plan. That it's, especially with increasing pressure on rates,
Because that will fix some of this by doing that.
yes.
It'll push it down.
Yes, so for more clarity for the rest of you, I would expect to have more tiers such that there's a lifeline level, such that life-sustaining amounts of water are available as inexpensively as I can, and then rapidly increase the fees for additional tiers. Yes.
Commissioner Hurt.
So two things. Typically, when you're doing that with the notion that you're trying to get those that get hit with the higher tier to slow their roll. And so you can't count on that as a revenue
That's
stream.
also
Because
correct.
that's about a behavior modification approach. And typically, that's an algebraic equation. You're solving for X, you're going to decrease somewhere along the way unless you're going for an overall increase when we do that. So I'm not sure that positively impacts a cash flow analysis.
It's an art, you're right, is that because the behavior impact is unknown. So it'll have to be, when we implement that strategy, it'll have to be able to be flexible to be able to change as we get a better understanding of how our customers' behavior changes.
Right. So, and then the last comment that I'll share with regard to just the philosophy about going into this with the notion of debt in '05 or '07 is that, could be wrong, I'm counting on this, we're going to go into an inflationary period. We've had low rates for a very long period of time, and I can't imagine that we could borrow then at what we can borrow now, so this probably doesn't take that into account. My thought is, better now than later. Not to borrow, but to pay off.
I concur with Commissioner Hur 100%.
I like the I concur with Commissioner Hur thing.
And we did refinance bonds recently. So, and the enterprise funds rating, the rest of you know this, but we're AA+.
And we worked hard to get it, too.
Yes, we did.
Further discussion? Okay.
With that, on to solid waste, which should go faster since we're familiar with the concept of these panels now.
Oh, don't bet on that.
All right, so on to solid waste. In And so what we're recommending, again, like water and sewer, is that we proceed with 1 year of rating increase and then reevaluate next summer prior to fiscal year '23, once we have greater understanding, or once we have the results, I should say, of the solid waste master plan, which should be completed by that point and ready to inform the budget setting and rate-making practice. There are a couple of key takeaways. The first is that, much as was presented last year, there is an ongoing structural cash flow deficit within this fund. Our expenses exceed our revenues. And while the fund currently has substantial levels of fund balance, if, as Terry said earlier on, if no rate adjustments were made between now and then, we would be projecting a complete exhaustion of the fund balance by fiscal year '28. And so another key takeaway, or I guess expanding upon the topic of fund balance or reserves being exhausted, is the concept of the minimum reserve fund policy within solid waste. So historically, well, the planning target has historically been $10 million per year, but the fund has had well above that $10 million, well north of $20 million per year. But then in 2017, Hurricane Irma came, and the price tag for hurricane debris cleanup was $19 million. And to this day, as per my understanding, the county hasn't yet received all of what's expected to be reimbursed from FEMA. And so looking at that $10 million target, as we're starting to kind of, with our financial planning, kind of manage down the use of reserves to our $10 million target, the question that has arisen is, is $10 million a good target for planning purposes, or would we want somewhere closer to $20 million in the event of a hurricane like Hurricane Irma passing through? And should there be 2 storms in a given year, then the fund would be tapped out. So that was a topic we discussed last time, last year, I should say, and we'll again look at a scenario of what if we want to support approximately $20 million of reserves versus the $10 million. And so that $10 million is kind of baked into all of our baselines, but we do have an alternative scenario that will show what the cost is for the higher level of reserves. And so, just to reiterate, key planning considerations then revolve around the CIP, or rather the results of the master plan that's currently being developed. And again, near-term CIP budget versus what may come from the master plan. Unlike water and sewer, we did not bake into our baseline a doubling of the CIP. We're rolling with the CIP budget, but we do have a scenario that we looked at that says, what if the results of that study dictate that we need to double our CIP, like we're assuming for water and sewer, or water and wastewater, and what impact upon the rate plan would that generate? So in terms of rate plans evaluated, we have our baseline financial management plan, which again just assumes, this plan will tell us what level annual rate increase is needed during each year of the forecast, starting fiscal year '22, to fund all of the requirements that we've identified. Then our alternative scenario 1 says, okay, with that baseline, what rate adjustments are needed if we doubled our CIP? Alternative scenario 2 says, what would happen to the baseline if we increased our reserve to $20 million versus our planning target of 10? And then alternative scenario 3 is, again, a set of scenarios that says, what if we delay 1 year? What would be the impact to the rate plan over a multi-year period to recover that lost revenue, or to fix it one time? And so this dashboard looks very similar to water and wastewater. In fact, it's a little simpler. We're not reporting debt service coverage on this chart because the fund has no debt, and we don't anticipate going to the market to fund any of the needs. That second row shows our tipping fee per ton. It's currently $34.17. We have all the same charts, but you'll notice I will never show borrowing in the bottom charts to fund the CIP. And in the operating fund, the solid black line represents our $10 million planning target, but the dashed line represents if we were to increase that to $20 million, that would be that target. And so based upon this financial management plan, we have a sustainable financial plan over the course of the 10-year forecast. You can see in most years on that center top chart, that orange line or cash out is above our black line. And that's basically representing our managing down of our reserves or of our fund balance above and beyond our minimum reserve target of $10 million. And again, you can see that we have an average annual spending of $9.2 million. That can't be right. That's probably $920,000 would be my guess.
Yeah, and I'd like to pause here for 1 second. So the CIP spending panel on the bottom left, I mean, that's a profile that's indicative of an organization that didn't have a master plan, and solid waste never has. So CIP traditionally has been, what's today's problem, what's tomorrow's problem, we can't get today's problems done, let's put some money in the next year, and then it's flat after that. So we're changing that. So the solid waste master plan should also be done late this summer, this fall, and if I time it right, we'll do a workshop on both water, wastewater, and solid waste at the same time to present those findings.
All right. And so this baseline financial management plan would work with annual rate adjustments of 3.5%. Under alternative scenario 1, so all else equal, but now the doubling of CIP spending would require an additional 1% per year, beginning in fiscal year 22, above the 3.5% of our baseline scenario. So doubling the CIP, in effect, would cost an additional 1% per year. Under alternative scenario 2, we go back to our budget for the CIP, but again, what would be needed, or what additional increase above our baseline would be needed in order to support a level of fund balance that is at or above or approximately close to that $20 million target? And so that would be an increase of 1.5% per year beginning in fiscal year 22, or a total annual increase of 5% per year beginning in 22. Now, scenario 3A begins our set of scenarios where if we assume a one-year delay, under scenario 3A, we find that a 0.75% adder above our 3.5 each year beginning in 2023 would be required. And so that would be a 4.25%. By 2026, that's a bill of $40.36 versus our baseline of $40.59, so a little cheaper after 5 years, or a little more affordable, I should say. But then by 2031, the trend reverses, and it's greater than our baseline at $49.70 versus $48.21. Scenario 3B says, all right, well, what if we wanted to fix or recover that lost revenue all in 1 year, fiscal year 23? Then that would be an additional 4% rate adjustment above our annual 3.5. And then we could go back to our 3.5% increases thereafter. And in 2026, that would be a bill slightly greater than our baseline of $40.73 versus $40.59. But by 31, that gap would actually kind of hold, but it would still be more expensive than our baseline of $48.39 versus $48.21 per ton. And so I can pause here, like we did for water and wastewater, and take questions if you want, or?
Questions? Okay, yes, Commissioner Lockhart.
So I had a great opportunity to talk with Mr. Balroop a few weeks ago about some concepts that he may be thinking about that I'm kind of excited about. And I don't know if any of those are taken into account here, or are we going to maybe revisit some of that at a later date? And I'm totally putting you on the
No,
spot.
it's fine. Are they included in here? No, they're not.
Okay.
Will they be as part of the master plan? Yes, some of them will at the very
Most
least.
of them will be a part
And
of the master plan.
Okay. I liked a lot of them. So just some of them?
Me too.
Okay. Well, I think that it changes, talking to Commissioner Herr's point, some of it is behavioral changes in our residents and in the way we think about solid waste and recycling and what really is the natural choice in terms of solid waste. And so I think that while we were talking about what makes sense to do in terms of waiting for the master plan to come out for water and sewer may make some sense in this realm as well, but I'm certainly open to suggestions and more conversation about it.
Great, thank you.
And that's that.
That's that.
Okay, Commissioner Zimbauer.
I'm sure that my fellow Commissioner Lockhart, is referring to some of the same conversations I've had. I'm as well as excited to have those conversations and get to where we should be. Arguably, I don't know that any of us could argue that point. But part of that, I hope, is this master plan, that we look at the Boar's Nest property that was purchased for the expansion of the landfill. And there's a lot of opportunities there to utilize that for something other than expansion of landfill once we get through those legal wranglings of the funding mechanism. But it's sitting there that could be used as an asset. We've got high power lines running through there. It's a prime place for a solar farm, number one. Number two, it could be passive recreation, opened up for folks that want to go out and hike or ride horses. You could have an archery asset. There's so many things we could do with that. It's sitting there doing nothing. It's not making money or generating any revenue for this county's taxpayers. So hopefully we're going to be looking at that and what we may or may not be able to do as part of the master plan in getting that property into a income resource for the taxpayers, or an income resource and possibly an asset that they could actually utilize since they have paid for it. So that's pretty important to me that we look at that as part of that master plan.
Sure, and you're absolutely right. I mean, there's thousands of acres of space there, and the existing footprint of the landfill today, 35 years in round number before we have to add new cells or new space for solid waste. So there's certainly opportunities to look at alternate uses for some of that property.
Other comments, Commissioner Herr?
I just want to point out that we're not through the entire presentation yet, and I'm not going to weigh in until you get through the rest of the slides, because they're interrelated.
Okay. Yep. That's fair.
Anything else? Okay, then let's get, if nobody else has anything, let's continue.
All right. So for your reference, for discussions later, we have the summary of results for each of these rate plans that we evaluated. We also looked at capital planning impacts, and these were scenarios that we looked at last year, but wanted to look at in the context of the updated financial plan.
I'll stated differently, these are things I'd expect to see in the master plan moving forward.
And so we have these landfill regulatory compliance projects. We have 4 scenarios, but it's really 2 sets. One is if we assume a $5 million of need, assuming $1 million per year of additional expense for 5 years. And the second set assumes $10 million, or $2 million per year for a 5-year period. And then under each scenario, we checked, we tested the sensitivity of whether that $5 million or $10 million investment were to begin in fiscal year '22 or in fiscal year '23. And based upon, we didn't include the screenshots of our dashboard, but we did include another summary matrix for your information. And so adding in each of those 4 kind of incremental scenarios on top of our baseline would require, under the $5 million scenario, whether the costs were to begin in '22 or in '23, would require an additional 0.75% per year above the 3.5% in our baseline, so a total of 4.25% per year. Under the $10 million scenarios, whether they begin in '22 or '23, again, didn't matter, and it's a 2% adder per year, so it would be a 5.5% per year rate revenue increase that would be required. And so we also have our local benchmarking survey. These are current fees, or the current tipping fee for the county at $34.17 versus the equivalent fee for amongst your peer communities. And Seminole County continues to remain, even with the 3% increase that went into effect this year, Seminole County continues to remain right in the middle of the pack. And so we're recommending, again, that we proceed with a 1-year increase, 3.5% for solid waste, and then we reevaluate next year once we've incorporated the results and findings of the master plan. Questions?
Mr. Chairman?
All right, let's go. Questions?
Do we have any understanding, or do we even track it? Do we have any kind of like major influx of, I guess, commercial clientele coming to our landfill instead of going to one of the other counties because of the cost differential?
I wouldn't think so, but Shaquille, do you have any input on that?
No, none right now.
So we don't have like people coming from Orange County because it's cheaper per ton or whatever to dump?
Other
Solid
counties
waste.
do come by our facility for days that in which we're closed, in which we're open and they're closed, such as Sunday. But we're not really servicing the Seminole County residents. We're serving neighboring counties' residents by having our landfill open, as well as they're bringing in other types of materials that their county or landfill does not accept as well. So basically, we're servicing other counties' residents at the cost of Seminole County.
Because those other counties either don't allow certain things to go to their landfill.
Or they're closed on a Sunday.
Or they're closed on Sunday.
Yeah.
Okay. Just wanted to make.
And also
thank you.
certain types of items such as commercial glass and stuff like that, they keep on filling up our landfill, and most of the landfills do not accept that. So that's why there's some other things that we have to do in order to be competitive and stay ahead of the curve.
Okay, thank you.
Name and address for the record, only because we don't have them.
Oh, yeah, Shaquille Bauer, Solid Waste Division Manager.
Thank you.
Chairman?
Yes, Commissioner O'Meara.
So first, Shaquille, let's fix that. But I'm perplexed on I have a feeling I either don't understand the recommendation or don't understand the model. The recommendation is at 3.5, which contemplates no increase to capital spending, and it contemplates no increase to the reserve.
First.
Yeah, correct. It's based upon the CIP budget and the $10 million.
Budgeted as we've historically spent,
Yeah,
which we
and-
identified earlier as being not adequate.
And I'll say from my perspective that solid waste master planning is more fuzzy to me than water. So I have a pretty good idea of where the water sewer master plan is going to land.
Well,
I'm less certain of where the solid, I know it needs to be more, but I want to see from the consultant a more fleshed out plan. So again, I'm willing to entertain 3.5% on this year when I have more detailed information to be able to have a tighter recommendation in future years.
I personally struggle with that concept because of the the baseline that we're plugging in that we know is not adequate is what we're projecting forward. So we know we're starting off at a deficit. And in that scenario, I think from two fronts. One, from the reserve, and two, which historically we've dipped into for Irma, right? So thank goodness we had it. FEMA doesn't respond quickly with paying their claims. And so I would land in this scenario at looking at scenario 1 or 2 on the first one. And I guess if we at least got there, we wouldn't have to worry about the secondary chart, which would put another 0.75 in there. If you look, I realize when you're talking about percentages, it clouds the fact that we're talking about quarters.
That's fair.
So, we should charge for dumping tons of trash. That's the universe we live in. So I would lean toward improving the recommendation.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Commissioner Delory.
Thank you. Terry, can you discuss a little bit about why you go from $10 million worth of reserves to $20 million reserves by doubling it? What's that based on?
That was the cleanup cost for Hurricane Irma was $19 million.
And
True,
I'll say,
but we should be getting reimbursed for that at some particular time, correct?
Yes. Yeah, and most of it's been collected, or
That's the point I'm trying, if we're going to get reimbursed, there's a finite amount of time you need for...
if a second storm,
Excuse me?
if a second storm doesn't come that summer.
Got to
I
have
think
the
that was
cash to
the-
support the storm before you get reimbursed.
I understand that, but
Commissioner Delory, if I may. So yes, you are correct. We have received about 85% of our FEMA reimbursement, and so we will be receiving it, but the last portion is we haven't received that yet.
what's the anticipated timeframe?
We haven't been given one.
I'm sorry once again, because we don't have the clerk.
Oh, Carrie Grine. Sorry.
Senior
Oh,
financial.
Senior Financial Division Manager. Excuse me. Sorry, my etiquette needs some tweaking. Great.
Further discussion, Commissioner Lockhart.
Paint the picture for me of who ultimately winds up paying for increased tipping fees. So who pays them and who ultimately pays them?
On the commercial side, it would be the commercial haulers, and for our residences, there's the solid waste MSBU.
Okay, so in regular John Q. Public speak, your garbage gets picked up by one of the haulers that shows up at the curb. They take your garbage away and you don't think about it again, but your bill every year that's in your taxes in the MSBU may likely go up because we've increased the tipping fees.
That's correct.
Okay,
What do our contracts with the haulers say about that, if we adjust the tipping fees? Is there a provision in the contract with the haulers?
I mean, I'm certain there is. That's
Yeah.
because we did it last year.
Yeah, the scenario, the equation with the haulers is based upon CPI and fuel increases, and we do raise that every 6 months. So when you think about our tipping fees, that's a very good question, because I believe that the fees with the haulers is based upon their own contracted rates that they charge us.
okay. So let me ask about when my lawn man comes and does work at my house, and he shows up out at the Osceola Road landfill with all kinds of stuff that he's done for the day, and his fees have increased to dump all of that. That gets passed on back to his customers, right? Okay. And then there's the guy who's going to do all that work and isn't going to bother to drive it all the way out to Osceola Road, and he's going to find some place to dump it. I've noticed we've had a lot of increased illegal dumping activities. So I want to make sure that we're looking at this holistically and knowing that as we increase rates, and I'm not saying that it's not the right thing to do, but I think we have to have a wraparound mindset of all of the things that may come as a result of that decision.
And I'll add another thing to that, I mean, consistent with discussion earlier today, is about reserves. Historically, we've had very healthy reserves in solid waste and have been able to front money for disaster debris. But, I mean, the question is, should enterprise fund be used in that way moving forward? On short-term loans, I think the answer to that's yes. But maintaining a $20 million reserve for that is a harder sell, which we do. So it further increases pressure on all of our customers. Can we do that? Yes, but that's a policy decision, which we need to discuss.
Go ahead.
Well, sorry, you just said something that made me think of something else. Does the general fund pay you back interest for borrowing that money? What interest what rate do we pay, and how is that determined?
They pay us back the same rate that we would earn for the county on interest. If we
Okay.
get that money invested for ourselves.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Commissioner Zimbo.
So along the same lines as Commissioner Lockhart, if the enterprise fund is not funding itself, who pays for it?
Enterprise fund has to pay for itself.
So at the end of the day, when the rubber hits the road, it's got to be funded.
Correct.
Secondary to that, and following up with Commissioner Lockhart's point is, and your response, utilizing a reserve for an enterprise fund as an emergency fund, although I get how that can occur and how that can be done in an emergency, I would argue that, to an earlier discussion from Mrs. Brown, that that should be identified already in our reserves for emergency funding for those purposes, instead of rating the enterprise funds, unless it's some, really catastrophic, out of the ordinary, that you've got no other option, no other choice, no other place to get the money. And then on this analysis, does this still include the X amount of tonnage of no charge tipping fees to those in the unincorporated area?
Yes, it'd have to be in there.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure we weren't changing any of that up. Thank you.
Further discussion? Okay. County Manager, are we through with the? I just want to make sure. I want to make sure everybody's together.
I don't know, you tell me.
All right. Well, no, I mean, I want to be careful that we're finished here. County Manager, I'm going to ask the question that I just asked. Are you all looking for a number today or not?
What's our time? We do have this.
County Manager?
We would like to have a number soon.
Okay. All right. I just want to make.
Today, I don't want to push you into a decision. If you need more information, if you need to think about it some more, this is an important decision. I don't want to push anybody into the decision today.
It's a one-year decision, right?
It's a one-year decision, that's what I'm saying.
I concur with Commissioner Herr once again. I'm fine with going that direction.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is, I've got two county commissioners that are suggesting a scenario of 4.6 for water and sewer for 1 year, and 4.5, is that correct, for 1 year for solid waste. I have a director who has come before us and asked for water and sewer as a recommendation be 3.75 for 1 year. Are you wanting to say something, or
No,
okay? And solid waste at 3.5, with the caveat that he's doing a master plan that's going to come back at the end of this year, and we're going to be doing, a much deeper dive into that for looking at the long term. Okay, is that correct? Did I say anything wrong?
That is correct. But listening to the discussion today, I'm comfortable with the board's recommendation for the 4.6.
Well, that's not the board's recommendation yet, Terry.
I got you.
That's two commissioners' recommendation right now.
So,
Wait a minute, I want to set the table here, okay?
Well, and let me-
For the
I might pull
discussion.
the tablecloth off, so you're ahead.
I'm sorry?
And if I could just sort of dovetail on what Terry was saying, I don't think that, I think Terry's recommendation was based on this belief that perhaps there was a comfort level with debt that maybe there's not. Both of those, when we're talking about water and sewer, the rates are static. So if you're going to have an impact from a master plan, they're going to be equally impacted. It's really the board's philosophy about would you rather pay for debt now or pay for debt now, or pay for it later, or actually have the debt. And that is absolutely a policy decision for this group. I think he came in conservative, particularly since we didn't do any kind of rate increase this year. But I don't know that, I'll speak for Terry in saying, because we've had these discussions, I know he's talked with all of you, I don't think that there's, that we believe that one of those is better than the other. It's just your philosophy about debt between those two.
So I just wanted to set the stage as to the discussion so that we could come up with this. So now we have a recommendation but I like the other recommendation too, is what Terry's saying.
Well, it's
Okay.
debt or not debt.
Yeah.
I want to try to address that.
Okay, but go ahead.
So-
I was trying to set the
So to follow up with the chairman's statement of recommendation, why did you give us all the other choices?
Right.
Why are they even there? Why have you gone to the trouble and cost to provide that additional information to us? Is it for nothing? Is it for, you should consider other options? Help me understand why we went to that type of work. Obviously, someone put what appears to be significant labor and time and thought into those other options.
At its very simplest form is demonstrating that no rate increases are a bad idea, and every alternative after that just shows increased pressure. So at its simplest, it starts there. So it's demonstrating, yes, there is a need for a rate increase.
So, and I realize this puts you on a hot seat, and forgive me, but I don't know that I have an option at this point. Why did you recommend what you did?
I made the more conservative recommendations for our customers with the foreknowledge that we'll be doing a master planning process, that I'll have more detailed information to be able to better tune in on those numbers. So based on the information presented today, I agree with Commissioner and Commissioner Zimbauer's.
I concur.
I concur with them.
Okay, I just wanted to try to understand the basis for all that, to make sure. Got it, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, other discussion.
So I'll weigh in. I'll be perfectly honest with you. I understand where Terry is coming from with his recommendation, because it's the path of least resistance for this board at this point in time. And I'm putting words in your mouth, but it's the conservative choice. It's easy. It's much more palatable to come to this board and say, this is the amount I'm recommending, because frankly, it is what it is. From a long-term perspective, I think if we're reading tea leaves and we know that those master plans are likely going to point us in a higher direction than what your baseline proposal is, I think my colleagues are saying, let's go ahead and move in that direction and not waste any time. I think, and the debt perspective, certainly. But I would be comfortable with Commissioner Herr and Commissioner Zimbauer's perspective. I think they make a great argument for that particular scenario. I agree, I've never seen quite so many scenarios presented to us before for options. I think it would be the easiest thing for us to do to go with your original outline and recommendation, but at the end of the day, I think we're going to wind up having to take a bigger bite out of the apple anyway.
Okay.
So now you've got 3 people who've gone on the record with their opinion.
Commissioner Dillard, anything?
Well, you got 3, let's do it.
In other words, he doesn't want to say what he thinks.
No, that's not what he's saying. That's not what he's saying.
Just to let you know, for the record, wait a
Well-
minute, she said such.
I did.
For the record, it's very hard for me to say what we're doing with capital improvement until I understand what the capital improvement plan is. I said that earlier.
Yeah, no, you're right.
I said that earlier, both on water and wastewater, and I'm saying it now. It's difficult for me to tell you I approve and move forward with the capital improvement, because there's several things that need to be done with it. Wait a minute, when it comes about water, I need to ensure that what we talked about with St. John's about alternate water supplies, are we doing that? We don't have that information yet. It's very difficult for me to make that scenario or that jump. It really is.
And I don't disagree, but the beauty...
Jay, Commissioner Zimmer, let me say, and then I'll recognize you. Let me have, and I just wanted to say that I'm okay with the suggestion. I always am. The last thing I want ever is to sit there and, make someone else pay for something that we should be paying for right now. But yesterday, all I want to say to you, Mr. McHugh, yesterday, you and I had an extensive conversation, and this was your recommendation, and I was willing to accept your recommendation. And I was going to come before us today, and I was going to accept it. So I think this is a great lesson. And the lesson is, in my opinion, give us what you really need, not what you think the least resistance is. I mean, we can make that decision once we get all the information, but the fact is that if you feel that this is the right numbers, and that's what you're suggesting now, then that's fine. If we feel it's too much or too little, we can make that decision. But I'm willing to go along with your new recommendation. I just felt that when yesterday you were talking, you were uncomfortable with going any further than 3.75 and 3.5 because you didn't know what was going to happen with the master plan, and you wanted to look at all the scenarios before you presented an opportunity for the future. So that's where I was coming from when I was suggesting that we go along with the recommendation of the director of the department. But now it looks like we have got a different consensus, and certainly, and a consensus with the director, and I'm certainly fine with that. Mr. Zimbauer, Commissioner Zimbauer.
I just want to remind my fellow commissioners that this really is a one-year
Yep.
deal. We're going to have the opportunity to revisit this, and I'm glad we're having this conversation. And I agree with Commissioner Constantine on several points. I think we all understand, I've experienced it in my 2 years here, that often, for whatever reason, historical reasons, pressure, whatever the case might be, we are the elected folks that have to make the hard decisions. Staff, I have to have a confidence level that staff is going to bring to us what they truly need without some external forces of trying to read the tea leaves or trying to assume what this body might ultimately decide. Give us the raw, hard, the nasty, the ugly, the truth, the reality, and then we all have to sort that out. All I need as a commissioner is from the experts to tell me, and I have to rely upon you all as experts, to tell me what we should do, what you recommend we do, answer those questions when they come up, so at the end of all that dialogue that we all share back and forth, we can make that decision. Now, we all might not agree, but at least we've got the raw data, good, bad, or otherwise, that we can make a sound decision. But I think really in this matter, it's a 1 year, it's if we have to roll it back beyond where it is now, back to the minimum of what the bond requirements are, we can get there.
And I think we're where we are now because last year we were looking at an unknown future.
Right.
In the middle of a pandemic, not knowing what the citizens were going to get or not get from federal government, state government, or anybody else. And we tried to make the right decision then, and that put us in a situation where this year looks like, for the betterment of the department, it needs to be, and the two funds, it needs to be increased at this level.
And all during the pandemic, people are cleaning their yards and pulling their weeds and dumping it, increasing it to landfill.
And if you listen to Commissioner Lockhart,
Remodeling
they were
their
dumping it in the drainage ditch. No. Commissioner DeLorean.
The only issue I have is that by keeping it at the lower level, you're actually forcing staff to come up with a more realistic CIP, because that CIP, it's very easy to increase it, but the bottom line is by keeping it at the lower level, you're actually asking for what the right number is, what needs to happen, because at the bottom line, it's the citizens that pay for it. That's who pays the tipping fee. It's the citizens. And when you're talking about increasing it, there's people that are making some hard decisions, even though we're starting to come out of this pandemic. A lot of people have not come out of it holistically financially yet. So just be careful of that. And I think until you understand what the CIP is, it's difficult to go for a higher number.
So if I can make a suggestion so we can move on. We have given you the number of a consensus of 4.6 and 4.5, and we've also said to give us the real numbers. So you can base it on that, but, you know, when the final budget comes back, if you think that it's less, give us the recommendation, okay? And
That's
we'll, maybe we'll accept it. But if if you come back and you analyze the numbers and you feel that the 4.6 and the 4.5 is more than you need, then come back and tell us that too.
I disagree
okay?
with that.
So I
You
just want to
disagree with
point
that? I'm
out,
sorry.
so there's a disconnect in the logic.
Okay.
The disconnect in the logic is that we have one of us saying, I want to make sure that the CIP covers every single thing that we need to cover, which is critical.
That's
We
correct.
have to do that. And then we're saying, give us the right number, give us the real number, which is legit. And then we're saying, well, here's the number, but then if you can make it less than that. So I have every faith that the employees here are doing everything they possibly can to manage as efficiently as possible, or we couldn't manage to the revenue levels that we bring in compared to other entities. So my perspective is, if we give the number, certainly if there's room, come back with it, but with the idea that we want that plan to certify that we are building a future plan for clean water and a clear environment at an affordable rate for the citizens of the county. It's not around the minimal difference.
And, Mr. Chairman,
When I went over through all that
the key there is affordable.
Understood.
That's the key.
I understand. And nothing we did was unaffordable.
Before I went through, I didn't go through all the details, but what I was saying was what you were indicating. I had full confidence that he wasn't going to come back and try to lowball it, okay? I was saying it'll be another month or two. It's in June, right?
That's a month, yeah.
The master plan.
The master plan's later, but your budget, when is the budget for this?
We'll submit the budget on June 15th.
June 15th. So it's another month. I don't know, none of us know what's going to happen through that. I'm just saying that if if Terry continues to analyze this thing and feels that this is the right number, just like today he's decided that 4.6 and 4.5 is the right number, then, that's all I was saying. But all based on that we are taking care of, what we have suggested today with the CIP and everything that Commissioner Hurst said. I'm not going to go ahead and repeat everything. Okay?
And from my perspective, having all these alternatives is what led to this discussion, and I thought it was a very good discussion today. So thank all of you for your input.
Concur.
It ran a little longer than I was expecting, but discussion was good.
Thank you for making us think hard.
Yes.
Thank you.
Good stuff.
All right?
Do more spreadsheets next time.
Do we need a few minutes break?
Yes, please.
But that doesn't
Okay.
mean bring us 25 different options next time.
That means bring us one.
They'll be in my back pocket.
Bring us back one.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so Ms. Hammock, you're up next with the impact fees. Let's take a 10-minute break till 10 till 4. while she gets organized. Thank you very much. because give everybody the opportunity. There was nobody in the audience that wanted to speak on the last thing, and Clint, I don't think anybody was in the virtual world that wanted to speak on it, were there?
No, sir.
Okay, so we're all good on that. So we're all good on that, so let's just go.
We have a speaker form out here, Commissioner.
I'm sorry?
Chairman.
Wonderful. And I know we don't have anybody specifically right now, but if you just let me know while we're doing this, I didn't see anybody that wanted to speak.
Yes, sir.
No problem. And representing the city of Oviedo, Kawan Ma. Is that as close as, is that good? You need to come up to the front. I'm sorry?
He wants to speak on the impact fee.
Oh, the impact fees. I thought you were talking about the last, I was trying to finish the last one. That's all right. No, this is perfect. Thank you. So I know you're here, and that's great. Okay. So with that, let's go into the discussion of the impact fees, and I guess we're going to start with Tim. Is Tim, no Tim. Okay, never mind.
Tim got a break on this one.
Tim gets a break on this one. Okay. So are you going to start? Sure. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. All right, good afternoon, Chairman and Commissioners. Rebecca Hammack, Development Services Director for the record. I also have with me directors from various departments as well as consultants, and this is about the impact fee studies. And I have Rick Durr from Leisure Services. I have Bill Oliver from, I want to say Tyndale Oliver, but I know it's not Tyndale Oliver. So Bill Oliver, and then I have Chief Drozd, and I have Terry McHugh, and then behind me I have Negan Camp and Brian Mance from GovRate Inc., and Negan is from Tyndale Oliver.
And Paul Chipak will be participating as well, correct?
Yes, and Paul Chipak, of course, will be assisting greatly.
Okay, so everybody knows we have adjourned the work session and we are convening the impact fee workshop. So with that, who is going to lead it off?
So myself and Paul will get things started. The first slide in the main purpose of the workshop today is based on the anticipated signing of House Bill 337 by the governor regarding impact fees. And as you know, the House bill is enrolled awaiting the governor's signature. And there are provisions within that House bill that will actually, or the actual legislation will be retroactive back to January 2021. So we thought it prudent to go ahead and implement those provisions of the legislation. So one of those is, in fact, this workshop to demonstrate the need for the impact fee increases. So House Bill 337 requires a demonstrated needs study completed within the last 12 months justifying an increase in excess of 50%. Some of our impact fees we are proposing an increase in excess of 50%, but we do meet this criteria because we have performed those studies. And then we're required to have 2 publicly noticed workshops dedicated to the extraordinary circumstances necessitating the need for the to exceed the 50% increase limitation. And then lastly, once the ordinances do come before you, the impact fee increase ordinances must be approved by at least 2/3 vote by the governing body. So the criteria for the two publicly noticed workshops, this is the first workshop to meet that criteria.
Just a procedural question very quickly to the attorney. Do we know for sure that since the bill hasn't been signed, that if we do this, that this will be counted as one of the workshops?
Yes, it will be, because the bill does have a retroactive provision back to January 1st of 2020.
Just wanted to make sure. Thank you very much.
So this first slide, which is going over the general extraordinary circumstances for all the impact fee types, I'm going to hand that over to Negan Camp to discuss those.
Good afternoon, Negan Camp with Tyndale Oliver. One of the conditions that require impact fees or justify impact fees is the obviously the growth rates. And Seminole County is one of the higher growth counties. It ranks 13 out of the 67 Florida counties in terms of population, so it has a large population base. It's projected to add another 110,000 residents through 2045, which puts it in at like 17th out of the 67 counties in terms of absolute population growth. In terms of rate of growth, annual rate of growth, it ranks around 25th. Out of, again, 67 counties, and 23rd on residential permitting. So all around, that kind of showing that it's one of the higher growth counties in the state. In addition, the fees for the, at least the, 3 of the groups have not been updated since early 90s, and water, wastewater was last updated in 2002. So it's been a while, and that's another reason why they need to increase more than 50%. Really, ultimately, that all generates a need for additional infrastructure, and the options are growth pays for its share or a portion of it. Existing population subsidizes new growth, so that's probably higher taxes, or the level of service degrades. So those are really the policy options available.
Thank you very much.
And then 2 additional general extraordinary circumstances covering, all impact fee types are affordability of property taxes and user rates, and fairness issues associated with subsidization of growth by current taxpayers and utility customers. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to our first director. I'll hand it over to Chief Droz to go through the extraordinary circumstances for fire and rescue impact fee increases.
Chairman and Commissioners, Otto Drost, Fire Chief, Seminole County Fire Department. Our extraordinary circumstances are the need for 3 additional stations over the next several years, which you see before you on the slide, totaling $21.3 million. And this is also reflected in the fire forecast that will be presented in the upcoming budget. Yeah, in advance. Now, as far as what impact fees have done for the organization in the past, if you look at the current rate, Station 39, which is eligible under the impact fees or to be provided for through impact fees, at the current rate, it would take us 18 years to pay back the cost of Station 39 to the ratepayers within the county. With the new impact fees, that would be reduced to 7 years instead of the 18. Now, what we collect annually is $420,000 per year, which pays for about 13% of those eligible projects. With the new impact fees that would be raised from between $550 and $950 per year, we would account for 26% of those eligible projects. Now, if I were sitting in your positions and reviewing this, the question I would ask is why, with the fees increasing, it only goes from 13 to 26% of the total? And the answer for that is, in the previous years, we didn't have all the projects and all the needs built into the fire forecast that we do here. So now that there's more projects in there, it pays for a smaller percentage of the overall projects. And with that, I'll hand it over to Richter.
You literally hand it over. There you go. Thank you. So, for the record, Richter, Leisure Services Director. Regarding the library impact fees, essentially the discussion that we're having is about maintaining a level of service, and that simply as you add more folks into the system and you have a fixed system to deal with, you're adding additional competition, you're adding additional demand as you go forward with it. So a little bit of context as to when these rates were set and how they were established. Right after these rates were set back in the early 90s, the county had just finished building out its physical library system. So anticipated growth at that point was considered growing within our system, the physical system that had been created at that particular point. That fee has remained flat since then. Just to give you an idea of what the totals that we're talking about right now, the last year that we collected about $120,000 worth of library impact fees. Where that's spent is in new materials. So that keeps us relevant, it keeps us up with the times, it keeps us in dealing with customer demand. The increase that we'd be looking at is certainly nowhere near the kind of totals that we're looking at with water, wastewater. It's about somewhere between, projection between about 350 to 500,000 should the increase occur. This will allow us to continually, hopefully, keep up with demand as we move forward. Now, currently, we are blessed with an engaged public. We have an active customer base, and we've showed you some comparisons to some of our neighbors around us in terms of active library card registrations. Now, we're required that after 3 years, if you haven't used it, it gets it deactivated. So you have to remain active. So these are current numbers as we go through them. And just as a current count, just in the last 36 months alone, 79% of the county's residents that are registered have checked out some material from the library. So we have a great engaged public and a customer base. So all things being equal, if you have a limited number of resources and you add more people every year, you have more people going after that same number of resources every year. So the amount of resource that you have diminishes per person as you go through this. But not all things are equal as we look at it. Right now, how we stand, the average wait for an ebook in our system is 57 days. Just to give you some context in that, the average around the state right now is 47 days. So it's not great, it's not awful, but it's below average right now. Also just means we got a lot of people who are online and they want to check out materials from our library system. Again, not all things being equal, we've seen an incredible rise in the cost of new materials, whether they're hard materials, solid materials, physical materials is what I'm trying to say, as well as ebooks. And that is all how the market continues to evolve. Publishing houses don't want to go out of business. They need to find ways to continue to make money and publish new materials. And they're figuring out how to charge for use of the general public and going through that into their model, their cost model. We saw in the last year, and this is something we've talked about in the past, an increase in demand for our library services, an extraordinary increase in demand just over the pandemic of 30% in activity with our customer base. And certainly, last but not least, we have seen a 46% reduction in our state aid to libraries over the last 4 years alone, 58% over the last 6 years. That hammers our bottom line pretty badly. When you combine that with the amount of money that we're talking about in the impact fees, this would create a pretty extraordinary circumstance for the library system. With that, I will pass it on to Mr. McHugh, Dr. McHugh, excuse me. It's the right one. Yeah.
For the record, Terry McHugh, Director, Environmental Services Department. The extraordinary circumstances around the water sewer is that our customers currently carry an excessive burden of the cost of development reflected in their rates. If you look at the last 6 years average growth in our system and apply the difference between the current impact fees and the proposed impact fees, that means our customers eat $2.5 million a year. That's reflected in their rates. And as the board discussed earlier today, keeping water affordable, or as affordable as we can, is a key priority for this county. And putting the cost burden where it belongs is a key part of that. So the bottom line is that customers can't continue to carry the burden of growth. If the impact fees were increased in 2002 at an average basis, it would have been 3.5% per year to get to the current recommended amount, which is reasonable. So our recommendation is that the impact fee has shown a clear nexus that to right-size the development fees such that developers carry the true burden of development.
And then in regard to the mobility fee, transportation subject area, so this year 2021 update to the mobility fee is indeed extraordinary in my mind for 3 primary reasons that are summarized here on this first slide, and then I've got 2 more slides that go a little more into detail. But your impact fee ordinance requires the fee be reviewed every 4 years. The mobility fee has not been reviewed since 1995. It has not changed since 1990. And the methods and procedures under which that fee was developed are just totally out of date and obsolete. So we're in the process now of this study modernizing that fee. The current fee doesn't reflect the principles that are laid out for mobility fees in Florida statutes 163.3180 and 163.31801. And our proposed program does. The current revenue program is inadequate to fund the adopted mobility plan, which is a requirement of your comprehensive plan. So the proposed fee program will fill in that shortfall or the missing gap. Yeah, here we go. As I mentioned, those obsolete methodologies did not incorporate trip length into the fee, which resulted in inequity between different land uses. Some land uses are being charged a greater proportion for the cost of mobility than other land uses, as when you compare this with your fee, the old fee, with other communities. We have corrected that. The current fee isn't even based on your current transportation plan, so the fee has been updated to reflect the plan. It doesn't recognize a commitment that y'all have made of sales taxes to fund mobility systems, and of course the current fee does recognize those the sales tax commitment that you've made. The trip length that I've mentioned earlier is one of the key issues that introduces inequities. The other thing that's extraordinary about your current fees is that they are, in my mind, extraordinarily low compared to surrounding urban growing counties. You're paying on the order of $700 per single-family home. Surrounding communities are charging $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 per single-family home, helping to fund their mobility systems. And finally, the restrictions that would be imposed by House Bill 337 would actually prevent us from correcting some of the inequities I've talked about earlier on. So those are the primary reasons why I think the mobility fee is in a very extraordinary position and needs to be adjusted as we have proposed.
So that wraps up the segment of the work session regarding to the extraordinary circumstances. So I don't know if if there's any questions related to that before we move into a couple of other items that we wanted to discuss with the board with regard to the proposed impact fee ordinances.
Yes, why don't we go ahead and see if there's any questions? And since Commissioner Delory.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Rebecca, has there been any discussion with the realtors? I know we've had plenty of discussions here regarding impact fees that is paid for by new construction. But even though they're paid by new construction, it still affects existing house prices when those homes do get established. Have they looked at any of that?
Not that specifically. We have included them, obviously, as part of the Citizens Advisory Committee, and I did forward notification of this workshop to the Regional Realtors Organization. And we have heard feedback at the Citizens Advisory Committee that ultimately increases in impact fees do get passed on to the end user, ultimately impacting affordability.
Correct, because what I'm talking about is the unintended consequences of when you raise impact fees. When people start doing comps on homes, they look at the area, comparable size homes. So there is that. Have we completed the library CIP yet?
You mean the master plan?
Correct.
No, that is correct. That will be something that we'll be taking the journey on together over about the next year.
Okay.
That RFP is out there now.
Okay.
This particular adjustment would basically address keeping us competitive and being able to replenish what the supplies and the physical things that we buy for the existing library system.
So this money has nothing to do with increased capacity of the library system?
At this existing, no. You just funded the expansion, for example, of the Northwest Branch Library parking lot expansion. At the current levels that we have today, we would have to collect impact fees for 5 years before we could pay for another like project. That master plan is envisioned that we will be looking at the entire physical system and will probably be much greater in scope in terms of a CIP that will come out of this.
If I could clarify for the record, the impact fee is intended to provide additional capacity as new construction comes online. It's to pay for, I just want to make sure, because I think the statement was made that it wasn't going to pay for capacity. capacity, but it
I
is.
wasn't agreeing with him, I
Yeah.
just was listening.
Yeah, I just want to make sure we get that on the record.
Because it does address new capacity. So Rebecca, how much new home buildings are we going to have? Because we're talking about new dollars, new dollars, new dollars. How much new construction have we going to be looking at that these dollars can actually generate?
I don't have that number with me, but I can certainly research that and bring that back to you.
Okay. Rick, I know back in the mid-2000s, we did a survey, and we asked the citizens if they wanted to expand their libraries, and they actually said yes. And then we asked them, do you want to pay for it? And they actually said no. I'm just being honest with you. That's what it said.
Yep.
Have we done any surveys at all?
Not since then, no.
Okay.
We'll be looking at all of those tools available to us as we go into the master plan process, then, yes.
And then when it comes to water and wastewater, we haven't done the master plan yet, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. End of my questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner Zimbauer.
I would like to know what analysis has been done with the ad valorem collection on the homes that have been built, at least in the last 10 years, give or take, under this existing impact fee ordinance. It strikes me very odd that we've been able to survive all this time when it's been 30 years since the original was put into place and 25 years since it was actually reviewed, and 20 years on the wastewater. So I've got to believe there's got to be some kind of financial nexus to the ad valorem income that has offset some of the impacts of the impact fees that apparently we're arguing should have been updated, weren't updated, were not a direct nexus of the real impact and the shortfalls thereof. Have we run any analysis on that to understand once those homes or units are on the market and they become tax-paying residents, how that offsets the shortfall, et cetera, et cetera?
I'll comment on water and sewer. They would not be offset by ad valorem. The cost would be offset by the other ratepayers. So that
Sure,
so that would be a
understood
different
on that
be
one.
a different analysis.
And didn't he just, say- I'm sorry to interrupt, but didn't he just say $2.5 million?
$5 million.
Yeah, and that's, look at average growth, but I would expect if we did this analysis when projects were loaded up from the last bond series. So I bet if we did this in 2011, the answer wouldn't have been much different than what it is today.
So, thank you very much. County Manager, I'm going to let County Manager finish, then I'll get back to you.
Well, if we can finish on the water and sewer part first before we move to the other. So Terry, if you have something to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, just to clarify, it'd be, we probably could have justified the rates we're proposing today, something very close to this 10 years ago. So that's $2.5 million per year is revenues, or is that what our customers, or ratepayers paid as opposed to development?
Okay. And on the ad valorem, if we have a project that's 100 acres of ag that's got cattle on it, and now we've put 200 homes on it, we're collecting more taxes, correct? Than what we would if it was ag property. So based on that collection difference, has there been any analysis to understand, okay, they paid this impact fee, but you took a parcel that hypothetically was paying maybe $1,000 a year, $2,000 a year, $5,000, whatever it is, and now you have 200 homes that are each paying $2,000 or $3,000 or $4,000.
I mean, we can, analysis in respect to the impact, I'm trying to understand the analysis in respect to the impact fees, how much, because for the fire capital needs and for the library capital needs, they have been subsidized. The new needs that are associated with growth have been subsidized by ad valorem revenues. And the new homes are not paying more based on evaluation than the existing homes. So the ad valorem rates are we use those to pay for general government services. So in the homes that have paid the rate back when it was an appropriate rate, paid proportionately more for the fire capital or for the library capital that was necessary back when those rates were more appropriate and reflected the actual cost of that new capacity. They paid a greater percentage than the newer homes that are paying a lesser percentage now of their impact on the new capital and for fire and for libraries. Does that make sense?
Chairman?
Yes. Well, I was waiting.
I understand on your enterprise funds, I got all that. I understand on your library. But on your general fund budgeted items, on infrastructure issues, the money that's being collected on that 100-acre parcel with 200 homes on it now versus 100 acres with 100 cows on it, has anybody run that analysis to determine the taxes we're collecting now that are coming in versus the taxes that were coming in if it just stayed as an ag parcel?
We haven't done it on a parcel.
Because I would have an argument that not had those homes been built, we would not be collecting that ad valorem at the rate otherwise if it would just been cows.
Right. So the ad valorem is intended to pay for general government operations. Impact fees are intended to pay the additional impact to capital facilities that new projects generate. So when the impact fees were first adopted, the rate that new homes were paying then captured the true cost. The rate that new homes are paying now from an impact fee standpoint is not capturing the true cost of the new capacity improvements that are necessary. So that's being subsidized by the ad valorem collections that are intended to fund general government operations. They're paying for the capital facility needs that are intended to be paid for by impact fees. And the further away you get from the adoption of the impact fee, the smaller proportion of that capacity those newer homes are paying than homes that paid that same fee a number of years ago.
Sure.
So you're kind of shifting the burden from the actual impact generator to the overall community.
I understand the nexus of that, but we also have a 1-cent sales tax that has built roadways, it's built other infrastructure for drainage. And we've certainly had development happen on those corridors that there has been no need by the property owner or developer to improve those roads because the roads were already at capacity. So that's been funded.
Well, the transportation master plan that the mobility fee is based upon takes into account revenue from the sales tax. So the mobility fee is intended to bridge the gap between the sales tax and the actual cost of the improvement. So the analysis was done frankly, if the mobility fee does not get, if the sales tax does not get re-upped, we're going to have to revisit this. But the assumption is the mobility fee is being used simply to bridge that gap. It does take into account the sales tax that's being used for transportation improvements.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that we've looked at the sales tax impact, the 1-cent sales tax, infrastructure sales tax, as well as the ad valorem collections on the otherwise no houses would have been there.
So, but for the sales tax, the mobility fee proposal would be significantly different than it is today. It would be much more significant.
Commissioner Hurd and Commissioner Lockhart.
I definitely understand the point that you're making in that when you develop a parcel of land, you generate tax revenue that didn't exist prior to the development. There's a delta there, and it's a significant delta. The challenge is that the citizens that already live in a home that paid the impact fee when they built the home, which may have been 30 years ago, and so significantly different, subsidizing not only from a cash flow perspective, they're subsidizing it financial perspective, but they're subsidizing it from a lifestyle perspective. And so welcome to District 5. Every time we have a meeting, we have 100 people in here from my district. And part of the angst is around this concept that we're not keeping up with the infrastructure needs from a water perspective, from a groundwater perspective, from a road perspective, et cetera, et cetera. And so the fact that we've acknowledged that and that we're addressing this is significant from my perspective, based on being 14 months out dealing with the public around their needs. It is very clear to me that new people moving into the community need to pay for their portion of infrastructure up front. And I get that this is a direct pass-through to the consumer. I think our community is worth the increased price, and I think the fact that you pay a much higher impact fee to live in Orange County and then have to potentially send your kids to private school is silly. So just my 2 cents worth, living in the high-billed district.
I totally understand it and don't argue with that at all. My concern, Commissioner, would be this, in my mind, doesn't fund additional roads and so forth to mitigate the issues that we're talking about, by example, in your district. I don't know that we have the right-of-way or even the area to put those roads in to give those citizens a sense of we don't have traffic jam or too much time in traffic or too much cycle at a light. We have traffic. I mean, I think we all can agree with that, notwithstanding maybe in the far reaches of Mr. Delary in my district. But that said, we are one of the densest communities in the state. And I would love if we could see a plan where we're going to be able to improve roads, widen roads, connected streets, plans to get people to move quicker or move more people in a quicker fashion. I don't know how we do that. I mean, I've looked at transportation plan long term.
Cash talks.
Okay. Okay. Please, Commissioner Lockhart after Commissioner Herr, and please come through for everybody's sake, everybody start coming through the chair, please.
And Chairman, I appreciate that, but I think we should have the ability to dialogue back and forth with the commissioner.
I understand that, and that's why I let you go, but Commissioner Lockhart had asked for the next, okay, and I'm just trying to be fair to everybody, and then Commissioner Delory's next, and I certainly understand that you want your answer quickly or you're going to respond. I do, but I want to also give everybody the opportunity, and we'll always give everybody the chance to come back and speak. So Commissioner Lockhart.
Sure. So I want to make sure with Impact Fee 101 that we are fully understanding what is included in your formula, because this is all formulaic. So in order for these to be legally defendable, all of the things have to have been considered, correct? I'm looking for a verbal response, because that's not going to show up in the minutes of a head nod. Okay.
Here, I can speak to the water sewer piece. So the answer is yes, and the numerator of it is the value of our assets that's attributable to development, and the value of and our CIP that can be attributed to development. So I'm not including the value of distribution pipes and subdivisions, for example. So those assets are not part of the equation. The denominator is the capacity. So we're not limited by pumping capacity, we're limited by our consumptive use permit number. Right. So as that number changes, so if that cup gets cut, impact fee is going to go up significantly.
County Manager, since we don't have to have each person go down the line and answer yes, and then explain, you've been involved in all of them, and so has Ms. Hammock. Has all the factors that need to be taken care of in the question that Commissioner Lockhart has asked been taken into consideration? Thank you.
Yes. So then my follow-up to that, because I genuinely want to understand where Commissioner Zimbauer is coming from with his asking for, analysis of cows to houses. The cows don't drive, right? So I just want to make so I get that there's an increase in ad valorem revenue, but there's also an increase in wear and tear and need. And so I genuinely want to understand what the point is we're trying to drive home, so that I can understand if I'm perceiving the question to get to the answer. Does that make sense? Mr. Chipok hasn't.
As you mentioned before, Impact Fees 101 let's keep in mind what impact fees can and cannot do. The impact fees basically are in place to offset the new impacts on capital improvements. Okay? While, to Mr. Zimbauer's point, yes, there'll be more ad valorem taxes, but that's paying for the services and the operations and maintenance. It's not fully offsetting the new capital needs that are there, that are created by the new development. And then also, there's a restriction on impact fees that they can't make up for past deficiencies in the area. It can only be used to offset the new impacts that are being created by the new development. And then also there's the dual rational nexus test, which has to be applied to every impact fee. And all of the studies that have been created by our various consultants incorporate those concepts into the fees that are being presented to you.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Delory.
Thank you. Rebecca, both in the fire and the library, they talked about dollar figures on how much this would generate. In order to do that, they would have to know how many more houses are coming into this neighborhood or into this county. What's that number? And where are they going?
So, and this relates back, I think, to your earlier question.
I know,
We
that's
did
why I'm
ask-
asking in a
yeah.
different way.
So,
I'm trying to get-
and I
I'm trying to
apologize,
skin the cat a different way.
I didn't have the paper in front of me, but Negan kindly brought it up. We're projecting a little bit less than a 1% growth rate, and then we also have the number of, like, average, we took permitting for the average number of permits, and we looked at that for fire and for libraries. So for...
So 1%, what's that number of homes?
So for the fire service area, the average annual single-family is 619, and the average annual for multifamily is 728, for a total of 1,347. But that's for the fire service. And then for library service, which I believe is countywide, we're looking at an average annual number of units for single-family of 1,062, and for multifamily is 1,065, for a total of 2,127. And then if possible, if it's okay, can Negan address the question regarding ad valorem? Sorry.
Is there space for those homes?
Yes. We have vacant land still available for development, as well as areas for redevelopment.
Okay. No, I'm not done yet. But thank you.
No, please. Commissioner, Ms. Hammack wanted to answer something else.
She can, and then I'll continue.
Okay.
What's your answer?
Negan Camp, I just wanted to address very quickly to the ad valorem revenue question. Impact fee is the differential between the cost of the new growth and its contribution toward that new growth. So if it paid its full value with the ad valorem, the impact fee would have been zero. So that's that differential. They do generate more ad valorem, you have more ad valorem revenues, but also, as mentioned, there are a lot more services they have to pay, operational services, maintenance, renovations and so on. None of that is, so then when we look at the taxes allocated for expansion and what portion is going to come from new growth, these are the fees that are calculated.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, if I may. So when the fire service we're talking about, this does not address dispatch, correct, Chief?
That's correct. Dispatch falls under the general fund provisions.
So if we wanted to address dispatch, because the more people move in here, the more dispatch has to grow, both on the law enforcement and fire, correct?
I believe if we were to address that, we'd have to look at that separately from the fire fund provisions.
Okay, that's fine. And then when it comes to traffic, we have traffic around the whole county. It ain't just District 5.
Agreed.
Okay, I just want to make sure we're clear of that. It's all over the county. So this mobility fee, I'm hoping that, can you tell us that it's going to clean up the congestion of the traffic of the new people moving in only?
No.
No.
I understand that, because we should only be addressing what the new people are bringing in.
The hard questions, right?
Excuse me?
The hard answers, right?
I'm asking a hard question.
From the previous workshop that you had. No.
I'm not going away.
Across the board, throughout the county, for every 1 vehicle mile of travel or person mile of travel increase that is forecasted between now and 2040, you're only building 0.7 person miles of system capacity. So you're funding at a 75% of the growth rate.
So we're not going to be addressing the total congestion of the new people moving in.
That's right. It won't give you the easy answer. Congestion will increase.
That's my
It
point.
won't increase as much as it would without the fee.
And if I can just ask one.
I'm done now, Mr. Chairman.
If I can ask one more quick question of the consultant. Every study that I've ever read indicates that rooftops, houses, don't pay for the services that they cost when they come in, and that's why you have to have a balance with commercial, because you get higher ad valorem for that. So the ad valorem never really covers the actual costs of the services of the homes as they are being built. Is that not correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you very much. So the actual homes are paying for the services that they're getting right now from ad valorem. That's why you have to have the commercial. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Is there any further discussion of, yes, Commissioner Zimbardo?
I'm going to explore, as Mr. Chiplock indicated, which I understand, new impacts is what the property owner developer is responsible for. So in that hypothetical, you take 1792, road service is at level C, and we build 200 homes, and it remains level C. How's the impact quantified? That Mr. Dredge's wheelhouse, or?
No, we measure it based on the number of trips that are generated by a house and the length of that trip. So if a home generates 8 trips per day with an average trip length of 8 miles, say, that would be 64 vehicle miles of travel. So a lane mile of road has a certain capacity, so we know it costs a certain amount per vehicle mile of capacity to build the infrastructure needed. So whether the road operates at level of service A, B, C, D, E, F, whatever, the mobility fee still allows that home to make a contribution to funding the network. Granted, they're only paying about 20% of what conceivably they could.
So, yeah, Paul, I think we're going to have to...
And in response to your question, there's no, and correct me if I'm wrong, there's no one-on-one correlation between a particular project and a particular road improvement, okay? Especially with the impact fees or the mobility fees. It goes into the mobility fee fund, and the mobility fee expenditures are based on our capital improvements plan, which are part of the comprehensive plan, which look at the area-wide needs of the county and relieving the pressure points as those develop. And that is a fluid process that changes year to year as you modify your capital improvement plans. And new projects come in, and old projects or other projects are moved down in priority. So when a particular road is going to be built and where that particular road segment is going to be improved is fluid, but it's all part of the mobility. The mobility fee offsets a portion of that capital improvements plan.
And this makes sense, because if the county goes out and builds a brand-new 4-lane road, and a developer comes in on that brand-new 4-lane road, he still needs to participate in the funding of the overall network on an equitable basis with those who may not be on that 4-lane road.
All right. We talked through the impact fees. I know that Ms. Amick wants to go into the affordable housing.
Mr. Chairman, I just
next.
have one final question, impact fees, if I may.
Okay, but I still have public, yes,
I understand that.
go ahead.
So during a work session, several work sessions back, I can't tell you when it took place, but we talked about TOD impact fees when it comes to Sunrail, and I've not yet got an answer from anyone.
I think right now, yeah, there's no specific land use category in your fee schedule for transit-oriented development. The ordinance does have a provision, though, for if a developer feels like he is doing a transit-oriented development and he generates less trips or shorter trip lengths because he's in a more dense area of the community, he has the ability to come and petition the county for a reduced fee.
They'll never do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Is everybody okay with me going into public comment now? And no other questions? Okay. This is on the mobility fee, I believe. This is on the impact fee workshop. Mr.
I think Ms. Hammack still has some more.
Rebecca's not done with impact fees.
No, but she was going into the affordable housing.
Well,
As it relates-
that's related
as it
to the
relates to
impact
impact
fees.
I understand
Okay.
that, but I think this was specifically on the mobility fee, but okay, if we want to do that, I was just, okay, fine, I was just trying to be, go ahead.
I mean, I can certainly defer to the citizen comment.
Everybody go. You want-
All right, so I'll try to go quickly because I know it's been a long
okay.
day. So since after we covered the extraordinary circumstances, there were a couple of items that I wanted to talk to the board about and get some direction on with regard to the proposed ordinances and the changes that staff's working on since the work session that we had in April regarding the impact fees. And the first is indexing. Originally, when this was prepared, we were proposing to add indexing language into the ordinances. However, upon further review of the proposed legislation, Paul has, in the county attorney's office, has recommended that we cannot include that indexing language other than in the resolution for the water and the wastewater, since the Florida statutes doesn't cover the water and the wastewater capacity fees. Is that, am I correct, Paul?
Yes, that is correct. And to expand on that a little bit, the new legislation, 337, House Bill 337, provides that you cannot raise the impact fees more than 50% unless there's extraordinary circumstances. And if you do the impact fees at 50% or less, if it is between 25 and 50%, it has to be brought in over a 4-year increment. Since we are using the extraordinary circumstances, we are raising them beyond 50%. And there's also another provision in House Bill 337 that you can't raise impact fees or do new studies more than every 4 years. So since we are raising beyond the 50%, and if we wanted to add an indexing in, that means we would be going beyond the 50% plus adding additional increments every year after that. So if you want to consider indexing, I consider this round of impact fees an adjustment to where we've ignored them for a period of time. We're doing a correction now to set them where they should be. And then in the future, when we do our review in 4 years, you can consider the indexing at that time, which would then make a minor modification for costs and cost of living increases to the impact fees. And that could be automatic each year and be brought to you back. But that has to be part of a future study because that was not incorporated into the studies we have now. And again, we are going beyond the 50%, so we are limited to additional raises beyond what we are including in our initial reallocation of the impact fees at this point in time.
Commissioner Zimbauer?
Do we have the ability to phase over 2, 3, 4 years?
In my opinion, in our present circumstance, no, we do not, because the fees are, with House Bill 337, we're limited to a maximum of 50%, okay? The schedules that have been presented to you all have components of the fees that are well beyond 50% adjustment from what the present fees are.
So you couldn't do 25% the first year, 10% the next year, 10% the next year, and 5% the next year?
Under House Bill 337, you could do that. It might need to be, a little bit more equal in each year.
Yeah, just a thought process.
Right, but again, you're limited to a maximum of the 50%.
Right.
And again,
Understood.
our schedule is not within that. So in the future, yes, you could do that. But again, the no pun intended, the road we're going down and have been going down since we've been working on these for the last 2 years is a one-time increase. Again, using the model that, and the direction that the Board of County Commissioners gave when we did the school impact fees, because again, they had a phasing component suggested there, but the determination of the Board of County Commissioners was do it once and do it for the full amount of the impact fee raise. So we followed that methodology for this round of impact fee adjustments on the other ordinances.
Okay. Thank you.
Commissioner Delory, did I see you have a hand raised?
No, did not.
Commissioner Lockhart.
Phasing brings up a really good point, and not to relive the educational impact fee experience from a few years ago, but, I mean, that was a big part of it was, is phasing something that is more reasonable and helpful to the development community? Does that give them time to plan? And so that was part of the reason why the school board made that recommendation. In this scenario, to your point, we have been talking about this, and this has been on our agenda in one way, shape, or form or another for 2 years. And we've kicked this can down the road, not just since 1990, but since we started talking about it 2 years ago. We keep pushing it out for a variety of reasons. Not that the reasons aren't valid, but they keep getting pushed out. So in my mind, the idea of phasing, if it was to be gracious to anyone, that we've fired multiple warning shots over the bow that this is coming. So this should not come to anyone as a big surprise that we're having these discussions.
And as I recall, the commission decided not to phase, even though it was a recommendation not to phase the school board, because even the other studies came back from the home builders and others said that it was a reasonable, cost. I have a question. It really is not a question, it's a discussion that we had yesterday, Mr. Chipoff, and that is, in this, we want to ensure that we're just not, and I think all of you at one point or another have said this, that we're not just, evaluating the impact fees, but it truly comes back to the commission as far as whether or not we are going to do another study or not. And so there's stronger language as far as bringing it back every 4 years, and that will be in the ordinance. Is that correct?
The existing ordinances, as they are drafted, do say that the impact fees will be studied every 4 years, and any changes as a result of those studies would need to be considered by the Board of County Commissioners and brought back for changes. We'll look at that language again when the actual ordinances are before you. We can look at that language in more depth and make sure you're satisfied and see if it needs to be strengthened.
Well, based upon
that's the intent. Right
based
now.
upon 337 and everything else, we better take advantage of the opportunity when we have it, unlike what we have done where we didn't get anything until since 1990. Okay, Ms. Hammack, please continue.
Sure. The next item that we have modified in the draft ordinances is we have created a separate land use category for affordable housing. We've done that for every impact fee type except for water and wastewater. We're not able to do that due to the bonding language. So we have created a definition for affordable housing that's a little different from what you see on the screen and what you have in your package. After this was created, we went back and further evaluated, and actually Paul has drafted that definition that this separate land use category would apply to. Paul, if you would share that, please.
Okay. Thank you, Rebecca. For affordable housing, the intent is that if a project is truly an affordable housing project, it's going to pay its own rate, which is a reduced rate. The state statutes allow us to do that, to have lower rates as a matter of public policy. So with that, if we're going to have a different rate for the affordable housing, how are those projects going to be deemed affordable housing, and what's the definition? In looking at the Community Planning Act, which is Chapter 163, Part 2, which is also where the impact fee ordinances or statutes reside. Affordable housing is defined, but it refers back to Florida Statute Section 420.004, subsection 3. Using that as a model, we've crafted a definition, and I'll just read it here. Affordable housing means a dwelling unit which monthly rentals or monthly mortgage payments, including taxes, insurance, and utilities, do not exceed 30% of the amount which represents the percentage of median adjusted gross annual income for the households or persons indicated in Section 420.0004 Florida statutes at 80% or less of the median annual adjusted gross income for the household within Seminole County, i.e. low income, very low income, or extremely low income. The period of affordability shall be for a minimum of 30 years as evidenced by a restrictive covenant or similar document running with the land. So again, to qualify for the affordable housing impact fee rate, it's going to be a two-part test. It applies to the low income, which is 80% of the mean income, the very low income, which is at 50, or the extremely low, which is at 30%. So those three categories of folks would qualify, provided that the property has the monthly income or monthly mortgage rate at those levels. And in addition, it has to be guaranteed by some type of deed restriction over the property that the property will remain affordable for a minimum of a 30-year period. And that 30-year period is consistent with other programs that our community services department does administer today based on the value of the properties.
So in what I distributed and what's up on the screen, this was provided to us by Community Services, and this is the 2021 income limits and rent limits for the Florida Housing Corporation. So you can see at the bottom for the median income for Seminole County, which is the $70,800, and then the 80% of that based on household size. Is included in this chart. So for the definition, we're saying that the income limit would be 80% of the median income, and then the rent or the mortgage plus taxes and utilities couldn't exceed 30% of that income limit.
Question? Go ahead, Ken.
I was just going to say, I mean, if we're talking about affordable housing and attainable housing, and we've got this plan, this is a great way to incentivize developers to do that. I mean,
and that was part of our strategic plan.
Right. So this, to me, is completely logical and consistent with what we've been saying.
How does that affect our land trust that says 120%?
So that one of the comments that we did receive back from the Citizens Advisory Committee is, would we consider expanding the definition of affordable housing to include workforce housing, which goes up to the 140%. And the 140, you can, if you're interested.
Our land trust goes to 120.
I'm not.
And positive goes to 120.
I'm not familiar with that. I don't know if Allison.
We passed it 2 months ago.
Oh, the land trust ordinance?
Yeah.
So currently, workforce housing goes up to 140%. So if we wanted to include workforce housing in the definition, then these would be the income limitations that we're looking at.
I'm done. I'm good.
So just in practical application of what I think I heard you read, a family of 4 can earn up to $61,000, I'm rounding, and pay up to, and the unit would have to have a mortgage carrying rate of $1,500 or less.
I didn't do the math, but I'm assuming that's
So I'm
correct.
taking the 61,000 divided by 12 times 30%, but that's a full carrying rate, not including utilities, et cetera. It's just the mortgage.
Well, it would need to include the mortgage and the mortgage, the taxes, and the insurance.
Okay, so that's, I'm just trying to do the math on whether anybody would build with this.
Well, I believe this is the same formula that the developers use when they're going after the state funding.
They usually will get additional funding. There'll be another,
Yeah.
there'll be another assistance. yeah.
Super, yep, I get it.
And in order to qualify for that additional funding, they'll have to be meeting
It
these
has to be
standards
within
anyway.
this, yep.
So we're not
But it
creating
puts
a
the
new standard.
rent at about
we're using-
$1,200 for a 30-year hold.
Or mortgage.
Right.
Okay, Commissioner Zimbauer, and then I think Commissioner Delory.
Yes, so when it gets into the affordable housing and workforce housing, I think there's other ways we can incentivize landowners and developers by affording them air rights that they otherwise would not have in certain geographic areas. If they're limited to a 3-story, they maybe can go to a 4-story if they're going to do affordable housing or workforce housing. Of course, that'd have to be point by point as each project came through and what was eligible to them, if we're going to encourage workforce or low-income housing.
Mr. Chairman?
Commissioner, you
Thank
were
you.
next. Yes. If Commissioner Zimbauer was done.
Okay.
I assumed he was. I'm sorry if I
No.
wasn't. I just think that if we're looking at this chart, it's a similar chart that we use for the land trust. We should be using the same numbers, same percentages. You know, that's my only thought about it. Instead of doing 80, it should be 120. Unless someone can give me a reason why it shouldn't.
I mean, staff is willing to consider that if that's the desire of the board. That would open it up to more housing
I realize
types that would be eligible for the lower impact fee rates.
Commissioner Lockhart?
We currently have, in our educational impact fee ordinance, the ability for this board to lower impact fees based on affordable housing. That language exists today, I believe.
Yes, it does.
But we have never, we've never exercised that, to my knowledge.
Since the adoption of the school impact fees in 2018, no.
Okay, so we could. I mean, we could for those, and then we could also include, I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, does our current ordinance allow for, in all of these other impact fees that we're talking about, do we have that language existing, or is that language that we need to modify if we're going to entertain this?
In the new impact fee ordinances as proposed right now, in the rate schedule itself is a category for single-family homes, affordable housing, and multifamily affordable housing. So in order to qualify for that affordable housing rate, the project itself would have to fall within the definition of affordable housing, and that's what we are attempting to quantify with this definition.
Okay.
So it would be new language. It's not currently in the existing.
Okay.
That's a simple way to say it, yes.
Okay. And are we, do we have an eye to make these all consistent so that we're going to align the education ones when they come before us here in the not-too-distant future as well, hopefully?
Yes, and I actually attended the first Citizens Advisory Committee for the school impact fee. They're just embarking now on the studies, and that was something that Mr. Rinaldi and I spoke about. I let him know what we're working on here, and so we will make sure we can hopefully make them consistent.
Okay. I think this is one of the tools in our toolbox. It's not the only tool, but it's one tool, and it may be enticing to some people.
And I think the more impact fees that have this provision in there, the more opportunity there is to take advantage of this, and the more likely it might be. We haven't seen it with the school impact fee, but it might not be enough of a push. But if you have that available on the whole complement of impact fees, it might be enough of a savings that would push somebody to do that kind of project.
Okay.
So.
All right, thank you.
Commissioner Delory?
Thank you. Have we looked at this and how that would affect all the impact fees that we're thinking about increasing, because there's numbers that their departments are focusing on, and by doing this, that number will get reduced. Have we looked at that and how that would affect the impact fees?
We have generally, we discussed that with the consultants, and normally affordable housing is done at such a low percentage that it has a negligible impact on the capital improvement projects.
I just want to make sure, because they're looking at dollars to do some of their improvements on what the new people are moving into the area are going to be needing. I just want to make sure those dollars are there.
Yeah, so based on the consultant's previous experience, it's at such a low percentage that the affordable housing units are permitted that it would have very little impact. Of course, there is always the option if we wanted to look at subsidizing through the Affordable Housing Trust Fund.
Can you give us any of that information so I can look at it?
Sure.
What that negligible number would be?
Yeah.
Thank you.
And as Commissioner Hurt mentioned earlier, these are probably projects that are going to need additional funding in order to make them viable. So there's not a lot of that additional funding out there. So don't think you're going to see a mad rush where every new project that comes in is going to flip it. But we'll try
I just want to be clear, and I want to have transparency.
It's a good point. It's a good question.
And the other thing that was advised by the consultants is, of course, we can monitor this over the years, and if we do have a number of affordable housing units that do get permitted and there is an impact, a fiscal impact based on the reduced rate, then we could adjust that in the future or look at subsidizing it through other revenue sources.
Commissioner Zimbauer?
A couple things. GOBA and the Florida Apartment Association, have they weighed in on all this?
So the GOBA is a member of the Citizens Advisory Committee, and in the next slide, we're going to go through some of the comments and feedback that we've received so far from that group. And I also did provide notice to Lee Steinhauer of this workshop.
Okay. And then on the mobility fee, who or what body makes the ultimate decision where the impact fees are going to be spent? If they're collected from a developer, let's say, in my district,
the board
that's not going to have...
The Board of County Commissioners through its capital improvement program.
Okay, so we've got a program that I would assume staff relies upon at that point. So you telling me every time that a project's going to kick off, this board's going to approve that, where that money's going to be spent? Or you're saying by default we've approved that through our 2040 transportation plan?
I think no. The 2040 transportation plan serves as a basis as the set of projects we anticipate will be built. However, each year y'all approve a capital program which identifies the funding sources for various roadway projects. The way I see it, a road project may be 80% funded with sales tax revenues and 20% funded with mobility fees. And that would show up in your capital program.
Okay.
Are we ready to move?
Anything that staff wants to add to that?
He's correct. In the budget process, as we bring you capital projects, we show you the different funding sources, so partially sales tax, partially impact fees, et cetera.
Okay.
We ready to move on? Go ahead.
So then the next item, this was a request at the last work session that we had with you back in April, and it was to create a waiver provision. And I apologize, let me switch it back to the computer. So at the last work session, the board expressed an interest in creating language for a complete waiver for affordable housing under certain circumstances. We've come up with a couple of suggested circumstances, and of course, we'll consider input or welcome input from the board for any other conditions that you might think are appropriate. So currently, what we're proposing is a complete waiver of impact fees for affordable housing, except, of course, for water and sewer. And so in order to be eligible for that complete exemption, you would either have to be land-owned and being developed by a community land trust, or an affordable housing project with a deed restriction having an affordability period of a minimum of 50 years. And of course, it would have to be a project meeting that definition of affordable housing once we finalize that. So for a complete waiver, we've expanded the affordability period from 30 years to 50 years. And then also if it's land owned and being developed by a community land trust. And then, of course, if the board wants to provide any feedback on any other additional conditions that you think we should consider.
The other thing you could consider instead of a waiver is, of course, to subsidize the fee through the Affordable Housing Trust Fund.
Any comments on this before we move on?
The only comment that I have, Mr. Chairman, is right now, first blush, I think the affordable housing trust fund should, I think, pay for it and not out of the general fund. Even though it may get funded through the general fund, the affordable, but I think it's, in my opinion, it's more in line with what it's supposed to be doing. That's my 2 cents.
Everybody ready to move on? Okay. Ms. Hammond?
Okay. And then the other change that we made since the last work session was regarding consistency. And I believe Terry can speak a little bit more on this, but we did, for the water and sewer, for multifamily, we changed from the bedrooms to square footage in order to calculate the impact fee.
I am still recommending, though, that for single-family residences to remain a flat fee, regardless of not using square footage for single-family residences. From a utility perspective, I mean, a 3/4 inch meter is a 3/4 inch meter is a 3/4 inch meter, and the impact ultimately on the system is the same. Multifamily units can, sometimes they're behind master metered, sometimes they're individually metered, and using a square footage or a bedroom approach like we did previously is a better way to get a handle on what the real population is, to be able to assess impact fees. So we've translated bedrooms into square footage, and you'll be seeing that next time around.
And I think going to square footage also helps prevent the concern of converting spaces that weren't originally intended for bedrooms.
Commissioner Delory?
Terry, can you expound on that and why you wouldn't want to use fixture units? You and I have had this discussion.
I mean, at the end of the day, it's about the population count within a single-family house. And sure, you could go about it fixture counts, and some do, but I find it is an unnecessary level of detail that complicates the issue. When you can get to a population through averages and population demographics, how many people is in the house on average for the lifetime of that house?
And I just think that fixture units would be more accurate. That's just my opinion.
I'm sorry, are you saying fixture?
Fixture units in the plumbing code, depending on what.
How many toilets, how many things?
Number of commodes.
Commissioner Zimbauer?
But, and I understand all that train of thought, and I'm sure in probably everybody's district, but, you know, I know in my district, especially out towards the rural areas, and then closer into maybe the Oviedo areas, Castleberry areas, I mean, we've got a lot of folks that are retired folks that are living in 6,000 square foot homes with husband and wife, 2 cars. That's pretty common. Certainly, we have people that have, you know, husband and wife and 4 children as well. But my point being is, understand how you calculate the impact based on the population, based on the real impact of 2 drivers in that household or 1 driver in that household based on its square footage. And many of these would be, you know, 5-bedroom, 5-bath units. So I'd really like to understand the thought process of how that direct nexus of impact, population versus square footage, how we're arriving at that. And I understand that's a tough one. And I think when I heard it's a difficult one to quantify. This might be the easier way to do it. Just thinking about that.
You have to, I was just going to say, you have to build the capacity at the plant to accommodate the 5 bathrooms, because someday there could be 10 people using them in that house. So when the house is built, we have to make sure that we've got through our permits, we've got the capacity available to accommodate those houses. So regardless of how many people are living there, we have to be prepared to accommodate the potential capacity.
Or they might rent it as an Airbnb. Commissioner Lockhart.
Well, could one of the consultants maybe or staff address the concept of impact fees being for the life of the unit and not for the immediate resident?
Right. Impact fees stay with land, and they are one-time payment for the entire life of the house for 30 years. So at one point you have a family with 2 kids, then they grow up, and then there's a retired couple, then there's a young family gets in. So it changes. That's why we look at an average occupancy of the house and how, on average, certain sizes, are occupied by how many people. And same thing at the school ones, like when we look at students, it's the average existing housing and with its population.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Commissioner?
And that's the reason why I brought up the term fixture units, because it doesn't depend upon the size of the bedroom or the living room. It decides how many plumbing items you have in the house. Those are the items that you're going to be using water with. And that's why I think fixture unit should be a better nexus to understand what that demand actually is.
And I guess my input.
No. Mr. McHugh, do you want to answer that question?
I don't
Sure,
agree, I'm just saying, I understand.
I hear the logic behind it, and it would be true at the moment that a house is built. But the life cycle concept, I think, leads to more fairness for it being more of a population-based instead of a fixture-based, because you have 10 bathrooms, if they're all dusty and the door doesn't work, well,
That's why we're a free democracy here, everybody has their own opinion.
Okay, Commissioner
We're in the
Zimbauer and then Commissioner, what I was going to say is,
We're not governing.
I will defer to Commissioner Herr. I think I'm good for the day.
It's not.
Make sure that the perfect doesn't outweigh the good, We are really getting into the weeds here.
But I think we sent the request back to move to a more consistent methodology. Team just came back with a more consistent methodology. Now we're looking for a different methodology. So I'm just pointing out, I think you did do what we asked you to do. So thank you.
I see somebody wants to speak.
For the record, Brian Mance from GovRates. In the report for the capacity fee study, we have a section that talks about the many accepted approaches to including fixture counts, customer type, meter size, estimated demand, comparable demand of similar units. There are a lot of accepted approaches. Right now, where we are is, as Commissioner Herr mentioned, we were, I think, tasked to kind of make the fees consistent. And so right now we've modified the water and sewer fees to be based on a square footage basis consistent with the other impact fees.
Thank you for that answer, sir. Is everybody comfortable with that? I mean, or may not like it totally, but they did what we asked them to do. Okay, thank you. Rebecca, would you like to continue?
Sure. So this is my last slide. And as you know, we have had 2 Citizens Advisory Committee meetings so far, and where we presented the studies and had, some conversations about what's being proposed. We had a meeting on April 9th, and we had a meeting on May 4th, and we have a 3rd meeting planned for May 21st. So some of the feedback that we've received so far, the first one was the CAC felt that the fire impact fee for fast food drive-through restaurants was too high compared to sit-down restaurants and fast casual restaurants. They also, like we had discussed earlier, they expressed that impact fee increases will ultimately affect affordability because they are passed on to the end user. They are supportive of the fire impact fee increase to fund more ladder trucks for apartment development. And they encourage regular review and updates of impact fees to avoid large increases at one time. And they were...
Rebecca, if I'm
Sure.
sorry, I hate to interrupt you.
No, no, it's fine.
But you keep saying "they." I want to make sure that this is probably a comment from an individual, or is this collective of the whole committee?
So it was so one individual from the CAC would bring up the comment, but it seemed to me that the whole group concurred with those comments.
So these comments are things that many concurred with in the committee.
Correct.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure that we had that straight.
And then they collectively agreed that a 30-year affordability period for affordable housing for the lower rate would be, I guess, acceptable. And like I mentioned before, the CAC also asked that we consider workforce housing in the definition of affordable housing for the separate land use category. And then they also made a recommendation for using square feet and tiering single family in addition to multifamily for water and wastewater capacity fees. And then I also circulated by email, I'm not sure if you had a chance to see, but one of the members of the CAC committee, who is also a member of the Library Advisory Committee, Susan Kellycutt, she had sent in her comments, and she wanted me to make sure the board was aware of those regarding the need to increase the library impact fee.
Thank you. Any comments or questions?
I was just going to say that concludes my presentation, and we can answer any questions that you have.
Anything else that somebody needs to ask right now? Is everybody okay with me going to public comment? Okay, then Mr. Kowan Mao from the city of Oviedo.
Good afternoon. For the record, Kakwan Ma with VHB representing the city of Oviedo. Chairman, Commissioners, thank you very much for allowing me to speak this afternoon. I must say you guys are asking a lot of great questions. I'm just sitting there and just taking it all in. You definitely want to be much more informed than some of the other jurisdictions that I've been in where they've gone through this process. So I think that's great.
And thank you for your patience.
Sure. No, this is great. First off, I want to say thank you to county staff. Over the past few months, we have had the opportunity to work and coordinate with county staff to address some concerns and issues that the city of Oviedo had with the mobility fee ordinance in its original draft. And last Thursday, the city, Teresa Correa, who's the planning director, had sent a letter addressed to Mr. Chairman and the commissioners to highlight the remaining issues that the city had with respect to the mobility fee ordinance. And so I wanted to quickly go through those and summarize those and then submit another copy of this letter for record. So the first one is the method for a municipality to opt out of the county's mobility fee ordinance by developing their own. And the city of Oviedo would simply be asking for the same type of treatment that was given to city of Altamont Springs, who has done the same thing. But currently, the section of the mobility ordinance, section 120.3, part I, simply requires that the Board of County Commissioners will consider adopting an amendment to the mobility fee ordinance allowing the municipality to opt out of the county's mobility fee program. And the city feels that there should be some language that is a little bit stronger in allowing the municipalities to be able to opt out. The second point is the assignment of the properties to the mobility fee district. And this goes back to one of the original issues that City of Oviedo had, which kind of started this snowball a number of months ago, and that is the failure to designate any areas within the City of Oviedo as part of the core mobility district, believing that the city believing that that is an oversight, and it is both unfair and inequitable, and fails to recognize the growth that Oviedo has experienced over the past few years and is presently continuing to experience. The third point is the municipal participation in the appeals process, which basically states that if an applicant who's coming into the county and wanting to develop wishes to appeal a determination of the amount of mobility fee assessed to the development, the appeal is handled by the county engineer with no input from the municipality. And then finally, utilization of the collected mobility fees, which states that the proposed mobility fee ordinance includes a provision that permits mobility fees collected for a proposed development in a district to be used and spent elsewhere in the district with no requirement that expenditures have any connection to or nexus with the proposed development for which it is collected. But I know I've gone through a number of things that the city of Oviedo has raised issue with, but again, I do want to commend and express appreciation with the progress that we've made with staff, and so with the latest iteration and draft of the mobility fee ordinance, these represent the remaining issues that the city has.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Does there anybody have a question? Go, Commissioner Blanco.
So could someone address each of those issues and whether we're contemplating them or not, and why?
So we are contemplating them. I'm not prepared to fully address them. We just got this letter last week, but we are working internally on a response and looking at areas where we may be able to work with them. We have been trying to work with the city for a number of months. We recognize that the city is actually endeavoring to do its own mobility fee, and it is our intention to work with any city, as we have with the city of Altamont Springs, when they have a mobility fee in place and when they're willing to take responsibility for roadway projects, just as we did with Altamont. I don't think we're comfortable recommending that the board adopt sort of just a blanket, we'll do this. I think you want to look at it and make sure it makes sense. But if it were up to me, we would have that arrangement with every city in the county. It would just make it a lot easier for everybody. So we are looking at the issues that the city raised. I don't know that we're prepared today to respond to them publicly because we're still kind of noodling around with them, but we did receive the letter, and we have been working, staff in the county attorney's office, to respond, and we'll make sure that all of your offices are aware of what those responses are.
Yeah, and is there an opportunity for us to maybe provide you some feedback and have some conversation before you respond to them?
That would be great.
Okay, that'd be good.
That'd be great.
Because I want to better understand what it is we're going to say to you before we say it.
So we are reacting to the letter. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. And may I submit this?
Absolutely. Commissioner Delory?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have a question for county staff, and I'd like to address it to the county manager.
Yes, sir.
I'll wait till you can.
Here, I'll take both of those. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Some of the major roads that are in the city of Oviedo that have issues, and I think that's what we're talking about, which is 434, 426, 419. Those are big roads. They need a lot of money. And I know that Broadway through Oviedo, from Oviedo High School all the way to Jackson Heights, with DOT, the county and DOT are paying the lion's share of it, so to speak. And I know this is for future projects, for future impacts, I get that, but I want to make sure whatever we do, we're making sure that we're watching out for those major roads and those potential impacts, as well as turning lanes. Because I can tell you that if you look at Oviedo, when it comes to Mitchell Hammock and 434, I believe we fronted Oviedo the money, as well as Lockwood and 419, as well as Mitchell Hammock and 426. through MetroPlan, and I just want to make sure that we're looking at this holistically.
That's an excellent point, and I will tell you that we would look, if we were to do an arrangement where they opted out and did their own mobility fee, we would still be looking for participation in those larger projects, just as we did with the city of Altamont.
I realize that.
So absolutely, so the record will reflect
And
that
then
that
if-
would be an expectation on our part.
And then if we're looking forward to extending Slavia by chance, that, there is some understanding there, because we are trying to get an agreement with Oviedo on that road as we speak. I've not heard of it yet, but I'm looking forward to seeing with Oviedo how much they want to participate with Slavia. So looking forward to having more conversations, sir. Make sure you bring your
That's
check.
on their radar.
Make sure you bring your checkbook.
Okay. Rebecca, are you comfortable with where we are right now?
Yes, I didn't know if you wanted to provide if the board wanted to provide any specific direction on some of the input from the Citizens Advisory Committee or on the income limitations for the affordable housing definition.
I think that, does anybody have any other comments? I think that everybody has pretty much stated all the way through the day their feelings. Seeing no one objecting to what you have put up there right now, other than the questions, does anybody have any objections?
I don't have any objections, but we didn't respond specifically to the CAC feedbacks, especially on the fast food for the fire impact fees. And I don't know if that's something you're looking for specific feedback on or not. I'd like to better understand what is it, why isn't it, what should it be, if that's the feedback you want. And not to belabor this day, but if this is the time that you're looking for feedback,
We do have a second workshop that is necessitated under House Bill 337.
Okay.
No, I'm just trying to get the date for that right now.
Okay. So then maybe what we could do is get with the
Get
county
some
manager
answers
all
for
of
that.
our questions for
Yes.
follow-up, and then we can do that.
Yeah,
Okay.
that would be, I think, a good idea. June 8th is the
June 8th.
next.
But we are bringing the ordinances forward to the Planning and Zoning Commission on June 2nd, I think it's June 2nd. So prior
great
to,
timing.
yeah, so prior to the second workshop.
Is there any way to make that make
Doesn't
more
make one
sense?
change.
So we were trying to stay on our original schedule to adopt at the end of June. So we will, the good thing is, we'll have Planning Commission feedback for you at your work session on June 8th. So the glass half full end of it.
And plan for that.
But, yeah, we were trying, and that's a normal work session day for
Okay.
you. So rather than scheduling a separate
Okay.
work session, we dedicated the whole morning to
All right.
this. So.
I asked the question that you asked about the first one about the fast food, because I have history in family fast food, and quite frankly, I was in support of what they've done, but they have you want to give the quick answer that was...
Sure, and I think Negan can explain why the calculation is so much higher. I think it's almost double, and I think Negan can explain why that is.
Yeah. So the fee is on a per 1,000 square foot. It measures density of people at the location. So these are small establishments, but there's a lot of traffic going. If you can visualize those double lanes and all day, people going in and out of those establishments, on a per 1,000 square foot, they're almost generating a retail level activity. And that's the reason. And this is a pretty well documented, measured.
It's turnover.
Yeah.
And they still have the same, the kitchens as the others in many cases.
Yeah, no.
Okay.
Thank you for that explanation. That helps.
And that's the only reason I brought that. That was a quick answer.
Yes, it was
They could
quick.
give that. And you're here now. So is there any other questions, or anybody want to have a comment on any of the other issues that were brought up by the members of the advisory boards, or Ms. Hammack, or any of the other members that are here? Okay. County Manager, do you have anything more to say?
No, sir, except I think we might have one other business item.
Yes, I know.
Okay,
I'm
just
going
making
to
sure.
get to that.
Can we go?
Yeah, I've got everybody always helping me out. Yes.
Can we go to the cyber world to see if there's anybody has any?
I was going to go to that next. Thank you. Everybody helps me. Okay, so Clint, is there anybody else?
No, sir.
Thank you very much. I think there's a point of personal privilege by Commissioner Herr.
There is a point of personal privilege in order to get somebody else on the library board because they're down some folks and they're struggling to meet quorum. I'd like to appoint Christopher Sean Lozier to the Library Advisory Board for a 2-year term ending 1/1/23.
Second.
Motion, second discussion, any debate? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, passes unanimously. Any other comments that any other needs?
Just thank you to everyone evacuating.
Yeah, before you all leave.
We appreciate you.
Before you all leave, we'll look forward to seeing you again in June. And we also thank you very much for being part of this the whole day. It's been very informative. All 4 of the work sessions, I think, were very valuable and informative. And if there's nothing else for the good of the order, meeting adjourned.